Hey, good evening. Welcome to another episode of Studio 118. I'm Ruben. This is Bungie.
Howdy.
Happy July 1st. We got a good episode for you guys tonight. But before that, I just want to let you know we are streaming here in Austin, Texas, live from Calvary South Austin. And we're streaming on YouTube and Facebook and even on TV, Cable Access Channel 11 here in Austin, Texas. So if you're watching us, welcome. Thank you for tuning in. And of course, on the YouTube and Facebook, we got the live chat going. So feel free to jump on there, say hi. And of course, as we usually do, we have a Q&A time afterwards, after our discussion. So get your questions in. Today, we're going to be talking about more aliens, but this time it's unalienable rights.
I don't think it's the same thing.
Yeah, I thought that's why we talked about aliens last month.
Yes.
And the next logical step was unalienable rights.
Yes.
We have Independence Day coming up, and I'm going to do my best to do my Bill Pullman Independence Day speech. You'll see that coming up soon. But either way, we're here at Calvary South Austin. Just to let you know also, we are open. We're here worshiping every Sunday and Wednesday, Sunday mornings at 9:15 and 11:15 a.m. Feel free to come by and join us for some worship and Bible study. And also on Wednesday evenings, we have services at 7 p.m. So drop by, engage in fellowship, and just get to know more about us. You can also visit us on calvarysouthAustin.com. Listen to some of the messages there. If you have any questions about what we do, who we are, feel free to call the church. Our number is 512-576-5433. That's 512-576-5433. We'd love to hear from you. And also, that number is good. If you want to call in your question, if you're watching on Channel 11, you can call that same number, and we'll queue up your question. But otherwise, jump on that live chat. I was told to let you guys know you got to smash that like button and subscribe and hit the notification bell. I think I got all those in the right order. But you got to smash that like button. Anyways.
We're not responsible for broken phones.
Yeah, we're not responsible for any broken electronics. That's all on you guys. All right, well, like I said, we have a really good episode. So last month, we were talking about aliens, but this month we're talking about humans and human rights and natural rights. And as I mentioned, we have Independence Day coming up, July 4th. It's a
Sunday.
Yeah, it's Sunday, which is going to be a special time. You know, Bungie is going to give a special Independence Day message, so be on the lookout for that, or come join us and check it out in person. So Independence Day is upon us. This is a great time to just recognize and reflect and remember just our nation's history,
right,
and how it came to be, and all the circumstances surrounding that, which we'll get into in a little bit. But ultimately, there is this document, right? The Declaration of Independence. And for all you Gen Zers out there, go and read it right now. It's a great document. But in there are some really good statements made about the fact that we as humans, we have certain unalienable rights. That's not a term, really used much in today's language, but
inalienable or unalienable, same basic word.
Heard it both ways.
Yeah. Nice.
So, yes, this concept of unalienable rights, and today, we're very socially conscious, and a lot of us, we do hear talks about human rights and basic rights, and which rights are afforded to us, and there's always this tug and pull with government, and and all that, which we'll get into again. But it comes down to, well, what are these rights, and where do they come from ultimately? And as Christians as well, right? Can there be an argument made for Christianity based on the rights that we recognize here in the USA? Are they pulled from Christianity or some other worldview or just secularism? And so these are all good questions which we're going to jump into this evening. But I think it's fitting with talking about the Declaration of Independence, if we could just read that relevant portion, right? The opening paragraphs that speak about the founding of these unalienable rights. Do you want to do the honors, or should I?
Oh, sure. Why don't we kick off with just kind of that first pregnant sentence?
Yeah, and then we'll get into the circumstances surrounding afterwards. Yeah.
Yeah. So And it's interesting that, Thomas Jefferson is given the credit for writing this, but it really was a community effort by that Second Continental Congress. It begins in this way: the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. That's kind of like the title head of it. When in the course of human events, which we'll talk about here in a minute, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. Very, very important statement there. The laws of nature and of nature's God, they entitle them, and a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. So, in this statement, we see the writers and the signers of the Declaration saying, "Hey, time has come for us to break bonds that have kind of kept us imprisoned to a certain degree, through taxation and whatnot." Of course, this is a reference to the tyranny of King George III, the struggles that they were having here in the American colonies.
Yep.
And the founding fathers of America kind of came to the place where they were just kind of like, hey, we're tired of being, taxed without representation. We're tired of being controlled, by good old King George III.
Yeah.
And so they sought justification for breaking those bonds of government and forming what has come to be known as a more perfect union.
Yeah. And so, this American experiment had been going on for a while, right? And they were feeling the pressure. It's like you hear a lot of stories of monarchs who basically, somebody discovered a new land. Well, I want my power in there, to be felt.
Right.
And so they were definitely feeling the usurpation of their freedoms. Without representation, nobody was there, basically governing them, but there were commandments coming from on high, and they were, it was understood that they were supposed to be obligated to obey them, but they were feeling that those commandments were unjust, and to the point, right? So there's, even today, right, there's a lot of laws that, are unjust, or we feel that are unjust. But we
Like speed limits.
yes, and seatbelts.
Yeah.
But we feel that there's proper recourse, there's proper routes that we can take in order to address those grievances, right? So these guys, they felt it came to the point that, okay, we can't just be complaining all the time. We have to do something much larger. We have to now disband or disunify or just dissolve the relationship completely. And they were ready to spill blood over it.
And listen, if I had to drink European tea every single day and be taxed for it, I would be angry as well.
It's a privilege, That's good.
It's time to get rid of tea and biscuits.
Is Earl Grey European? I don't know.
I have no idea. If Star Trek The Next Generation taught me anything, it taught me to not watch Star Trek The Next Generation.
Wow.
But
really? That far, huh?
Yeah, that was horrible.
Okay.
They completely lost
the one with Worf?
Worf.
And Picard?
Yeah, it was basically psychobabble in space. That's all it was.
Very cool.
Deanna Troi counseling everyone about all of their...
The one with the curly hair?
All their issues.
That's good.
Oh, it was just miserable.
Wow.
It didn't get interesting until the Borg, but that's a whole nother show.
I didn't watch it that long, I guess.
that conversation probably needs to be in last month's show.
Yes. We can do it next month.
Is Star Trek.
Aliens, unalienable Star Trek.
So yeah, they decided that it's time to stop drinking tea and start drinking a real drink.
Freedom.
Like coffee.
From Colombia.
Yeah.
Okay. That's great. So then they carry on in the next paragraph.
Right.
Now,
So they appeal to the laws of nature and nature's God, and from that, they put forth what they believe to be, their justification for breaking those bonds. You want to take a stab at that section?
Yeah, here's what the next paragraph carries on. They write, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed.
Love it.
A lot of stuff in there.
A lot of stuff.
But yes, they make a connection, which we're going to get all into it, but we just want to at least emphasize that they're making a connection with the laws of nature and of nature's God, and then that there's these certain truths regarding unalienable rights, and we'll get into what unalienable means, but there's life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and that these were endowed by the Creator or
Right.
nature's God, right?
Yep.
So it's all in there, but it's pregnant with meaning.
It's so pregnant.
So we got to open that up.
Yeah, we need to drill down into each section of this as we seek to try to understand, what do they understand? What is it that they understand about the laws of nature? What is it that they understand about nature's God? And how, the law of nature or natural law then affords men like them
Yes.
to say no to King George and to say yes to a new form of government.
Yeah, and I think within all this, there's definitely going to be a few things that I think the audience will appreciate during this episode is the fact that we're going to touch on essentially how do we ground morality, how do we ground unalienable rights, what is the best explanation there, but then also as far as the founding of this nation, and we've touched on this in previous episodes,
Sure.
but where ultimately did the founders, how did they derive their reasoning? Where were they being influenced? And ultimately, what was their philosophy like? And, that means something because that'll help us understand what is the ultimate grounding for these unalienable rights.
Right.
What is the correct worldview in which to ground these things? So,
Yep.
so you in the audience, hopefully you're appreciating the reasoning here. But again, if you guys have questions about anything that we're talking about, or you already have a question, leading up to this episode, again, jump on that live chat. Love to hear from you on YouTube and Facebook. And also, I forgot to mention, feel free to share the link on your social media platforms. Get the word out. We'd love to just engage with anybody who is willing to reason and talk with us. So, all right. So, yeah, let's jump into this. So, some key points, right, that were brought up within these paragraphs, right? The fact that it's self-evident being something that it's just obvious to the naked eye.
It's like Nadoy.
Yes. Does anybody use that? I grew up with duh.
Yeah.
Right?
I grew up with Nadoy.
Nadoy, okay.
Nadoy.
All right.
Yeah, self-evident. It's like you might be able to say it like this. It's undeniable,
Right.
and there are undeniable truths. Mm-hmm. And when you get into kind of a logical process of thinking this through, it always begins with I think, therefore I am. Right. So I think, therefore I am. In other words, if I deny my own existence, well, who is it that's denying my own existence?
Yeah.
I am. So the minute I deny my own existence,
You prove it.
I've proven my existence,
Yes.
right? So it's self-stultifying or
Yeah.
self-defeating. So in order to deny my existence, I have to exist. Therefore, I cannot logically deny my existence, right? So
Yeah.
it's self-evident that I exist.
Mm-hmm.
And it's self-evident for you that you exist, and we recognize that we exist, right? So you can just simply say that, here is this basic fundamental in logical thought, which is, I exist.
Yeah.
And then, you move on to the, I'm not a necessary being.
Mm-hmm.
So being is, and yet, being is not necessary. It's like this planet would continue to, float in space, in orbit around the sun if I wasn't here. So, I'm not a necessary being, and yet I exist. I come from beings who were unnecessary beings. Mm-hmm. They didn't need to exist. They came from unnecessary beings who didn't need to exist for existence to, be something that is true.
Yeah.
So here we are, at this point in time, at the end of this long line of unnecessary existing beings.
Yeah.
And we can't continue to do that forever. We cannot traverse an infinite back to that infinite moment in eternity past when there was the beginning of a long line of unnecessary existing beings. You have to end up somewhere with an infinite existing being, a being who is uncaused.
Yeah.
So just working through what we know to be self-evident truth, I exist, I start drilling down into this and realize that my existence, which I cannot deny, provides evidence, that there is this infinite creator who has endowed us with the rights that we enjoy. And to deny all of this, it's like Nadoy.
I think it's in the original document there.
It's self-evident
Yeah.
that all men are created equal. So when you think about that, it's self-evident. It's a Nadoy truth that all men have been created. So, you want to spend a moment on the all men aspect of this, because there are some people in the world today, and even those in America, who would point to the founding fathers and say they were racists.
Right.
Is this racist terminology?
Yeah, that's a very good point. So, there has to be, and I think this is a problem with today's culture, right? The inability to nuance anymore, the inability to understand that even we in the present, we have our own faults. We do unjust things on an everyday basis. So none of us are without fault or without. We are sinful people, basically, what it comes down to. That's the same back for the founding fathers. That's the same even back throughout of all of history. And so whatever piece of time that you are looking at and you're plucking out different pieces of history and circumstances, you're gonna find things that are wrong with these people.
I tried to understand nuance once, but I just couldn't break out of my current paradigm.
Couldn't do it. Nadoy. So when it comes to the founding fathers, yes, these are obvious truths that, a good number of the founding fathers owned slaves, right? Now, just owning a slave in general, the bartering and selling of human as chattel is obviously morally reprehensible.
It's horrific.
Now, if we can, though, we must look at the document as it exists as a writing by itself. Obviously, it's influenced by the founding fathers that wrote it and their lives, but the words that they chose were purposeful because they were trying to achieve a very specific purpose, right? Dissolving the relationship with England. But they felt that they were being imposed upon unjustly.
Right.
So they felt that their liberties were at risk. So whatever their circumstances at home in their own homes were, they still chose this sort of reasoning that all men, literally meaning every single human being.
Right.
And we see this in their other writings. And we also see that a good number of the founding fathers were regretful that, they owned slaves. But their ultimate purpose was to free them at some point.
Right.
Right?
And not all the founding fathers owned slaves.
That's true, right? So yeah, again, you have this mix, but they all came together and they purposely chose specific words that would just start this sort of wave from that point forward that would set in motion thoughts and actions that would lead eventually to the dissolution of the slave trade.
Yep.
But so they chose these words, all men are created equal. And obviously this is, I think, a direct reference, a biblical reference, right? We have in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, in the creation account, where God, existing in his triune nature, he is having a conversation, if you will, and says, let us make man in our image.
Yes.
And now, we can go into that for a good amount of time. Like, what does it mean to be made in God's image?
Right.
And we see hints of that throughout Scripture, what that means, reasoning and moral.
Kenneth Copeland has taught me anything about that.
Who is it that believes? Is he the one that believes there's 9 people in the Trinity, or is Benny Hinn?
Oh, that's Benny Hinn.
Yes.
No, Kenneth Copeland believes that God is like him, but just a little taller.
Nice.
Just ridiculous.
And he's short. He's a short dude already. So we're made in God's image,
according to his likeness.
according to his likeness, and this is every human being. No matter where you live, no matter where you came from, no matter what your current, state of life is, you are still made in the image of God.
Yeah.
And this leads also in the New Testament where Jesus kind of reaffirms it and just really narrows it down. He says, love your neighbor as yourself.
Right.
And they ask him, who is your neighbor? Well, he gave the parable of the
Yeah.
Good Samaritan. And says, it doesn't matter who it is. Your neighbor is just your fellow human being.
Which the Samaritans were this mixed race.
Right.
They were half Jew, half Gentile. And this mixing of races took place during the Babylonian captivity, so that when they came back, they found, some of the Gentile prisoners that had been left there to populate this region of the land of promise began to intermarry with the Jews that were left behind, and then they basically created a whole new race of people known as the Samaritans. And the Israelites in the first century, they despised the Samaritans, because they were a mixed nation. And so when Jesus comes along and says, to love your neighbor, and then points to a Samaritan as being the one who was actually accomplishing, that greatest command, wow, that was mind-blowing to them. And yet, it's important to understand that being created in the image of God according to his likeness means that we, humans, are image bearers of God. Not to say that he looks like us, because he's immaterial. But when we consider, the vast, magnificence and manifold glory of who God is, then we look at the different races of people and realize that we are all races of people are image bearers of our Creator. So like if you think, well, white people are the image bearers of God, or black people are the image bearers of God, or you start, paring it down to just one race, it's like, no. We're all the image bearers of God, which shows the manifold glory of who he is, in that he allows all people from all nations to be image bearers of who he is. And then Paul elaborates on this as he stood before the people there in Athens, and he says in Acts chapter 17, God, who made the world and everything in it, since he is Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in temples made with hands, nor is he worshipped with men's hands as though he needed anything, since he gives to all life, breath, and all things. And he has made from one blood, that's referring to Adam and Eve, he has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on all the face of the earth, and has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwelling, so that they should seek the Lord in the hope that they might grope for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. So in this text, we not only see that God has created all the nations of the earth to be his image bearers, but every nation on the planet comes from one blood. We all can trace our lineage back to Adam and Eve, which is scientifically supported, and then comes along and says that he has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings. And what this means is that God has predetermined and pre-appointed the times and boundaries of America. Because this is a nation that exists. Therefore, this nation exists because God predetermined and pre-appointed the times and the boundaries of this dwelling here in America, as with all the other nations on the earth. And all of this so that we should seek the Lord in the hope that they might grope for him and find him, though he's not far from each one of us, which reminds me of the Mayflower Compact, which was signed by those who initially came over with the goal of spreading the gospel of Jesus Christ here in the Americas.
Yeah.
And all of that is just incredible to me as I consider the Declaration of Independence and these founding fathers, who were working through issues of their time period that we're not working through here now. But as they're working all that through, whether it be, the tyranny of King George III, or the slave trade, which is happening in Europe, happening in Africa, happening, everywhere around the world at that point in time. And yet they're thinking forward as they attempt to create this more perfect union, a new form of government, which is rooted in the self-evident truth that all men have been created equal, setting the ground for an end of slavery here in America.
Yeah.
It's mind-boggling.
Yeah. And, also in addition to that, right, the fact that it's easy to simplify it to the point, if you want to reject this and be like, well, they still own slaves, like, what's up with that? Well, again, you have to understand, like, human beings, nobody's perfect, right? We're all going to have our bad innate desires and whatnot. But you look at the writings, right? This is just one document of many,
Right.
Hundreds.
Yes.
And you look at their personal writings and their collective writings, and they well understood that man, if left unchecked, is by default sinful. There was no misunderstanding. That was another self-evident truth. That was an assumption that was just baked into all of this. That's the fact that that's the reason, one of the big reasons they wanted to form a more perfect union, because they saw this monarch tyrant going berserk, and they wanted to get another form of government in order to address all these grievances. And so they, that's where checks and balances come in, and that comes in, in the Constitution a little later. But they were no strangers to the fact that each individual person, by default, has a problem with original sin. They have that stain of sin, and they're going to do whatever they want to serve their own self-interest.
Right.
And so in order to come together, they need these checks and balances. But
Yep.
like you said, they were looking forward, and it was a great setup. They could have easily, I don't know, they could have just baked it in and said, no more slavery.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if they had those conversations or any writings like that, but I know that the way they set up the government, at least to begin with, set that in motion.
I think there was some wisdom in the fact that they didn't, and one reason why is because this was so rooted in so many places in America that we see what happened when when the conservative Christians finally stepped forward and began to abolish slavery here in America. What happened? It turned into a civil war. Well, they're busy fighting King George at the time when all this is going down. I'm guessing that they weren't ready to gear up to engage in an immediate civil war after just coming right out of the American Revolution War.
Yeah.
So maybe not, can't say for certain, but they certainly set the foundation for an America that is free from slavery.
Yeah. In fact, I was just reading earlier that in Thomas Jefferson's original draft, he wanted to put an explicit line blaming King George for the slave trade that was going on. But as a collective, they decided to remove it. But also, he, as an individual, understood that that wasn't the pressing matter at the moment. It was more about, let's address just dissolving the relationship at first.
Yep.
So, yes, all men are created. Now let's get to created. I think we've kind of touched on that already, the fact that, these rights, they're explicitly pointing to an act, a personal act. Being created is something that can't be done, just out of the blue. It doesn't happen by default. Or, if there's nothing there, it's always going to be nothing. But, yeah, you need a personal agent.
Right.
And obviously, they say nature's God. They point back to God. And for a lot of these founding fathers who were theists, a lot of them were Christians, different denominations, but they understood that we're pointing to the ultimate being, which is God, right?
That's right. That's right. And a lot of their thinking came out of the writings of a 17th century philosopher named John Locke. And here's how John Locke addressed this. He says, "The state of nature has a law of nature to govern it, which obliges everyone, and reason, which is that law, teaches all mankind who will but consult it, that being all equal and independent, no one ought to harm another in his life, health, liberty, or possessions, for men being all the workmanship of one omnipotent and infinitely wise maker." Incredible. Here's this 17th century philosopher who is using reason to come to the conclusions of what the scriptures already inform us of, right? That there is one omnipotent, all-powerful creator. He is infinitely wise, and he is our maker. And he is the one who has given us reason as natural law so that we can make sense of the creation in which we live, and come to the conclusion from reason that God has given us these rights to life, health, liberty, and possessions.
Yeah. So I would consider that, a form of like early scientific discovery, right? Scientists in that time period were called natural philosophers.
Right.
And so what he's doing here is just observing nature. And he says, what are some aspects of nature in which I can now deduce certain things about humans? What separates humans from animals, right? We don't look at the animals and give them rights, although some countries are now starting to give monkeys rights and pigs.
Yeah.
It's happening, people. But at least John Locke understood there's something that separates humans from the rest of creation.
Yes.
Toilet
paper.
Yes, and the harboring of it. So yes, he pointed to the infinitely wise maker, and that we can actually we observe reason. That is the one big point that he's making, is that humans exhibit and use reason. And from there, we're able to deduce, obviously, that we have a maker who gives us reason.
Right.
Right. And we'll get more into that about, the different kinds of explanations for these unalienable rights, which
Yes.
Now let's talk about that. They get into, we've been endowed with certain unalienable rights.
Yep.
So let's parse that a little bit. What is an unalienable right?
What is an unalienable right? Here's one way that it's put. Unalienable rights are inherent rights given to us by the Creator. That is why they are called natural rights. They're naturals, because we're born with these rights. We're created with these rights. We're endowed by our Creator with these rights. The child that's conceived at the moment of conception has these rights by nature of what God has given to the unborn baby, right? Now, there's a lot of people who reject that entirely.
Yes.
And to them, I would say, well, based on what?
Right.
At what point in time does this new being that has its own DNA,
Human DNA, yeah.
human DNA,
Yes.
and is a separate body from the mother, evidenced by the placenta as a protection. So at what point in time does this unborn human baby actually deserve the rights that have been endowed by the Creator?
Yeah.
They weren't endowed by government. They're not endowed by mom. Mom doesn't endow that baby with rights.
Although that's one of the explanations given, right?
That is.
If
When
the
the
mother
mom
wants it.
chooses to determine that this is a life, that's when.
And she could choose and then go back on that. So I'm a human. Oh, no, I'm not. I have
Yeah.
rights. I don't.
So that there's a huge problem, because what if the government turned around and did that to that mother?
Right.
What if the government turned around and said, well, we've determined that you no longer have the right to live? Well, wait a minute, isn't that a right from God? Yeah. But if you think that you can take this away from the unborn baby in your womb, then why can't someone else take that away from you?
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
true.
So unalienable rights are inherent rights. They're intrinsic. They are dialed into, the very being that we are. Unalienable rights are the rights that can never be forfeited. They're fundamental parts of humanity, the basis for moral interactions between people, and they're irrevocable. Here's how William Blackstone, in his commentaries of the Laws of England, put it. He says, those rights, then, which God and nature have established and are therefore called natural rights, such as our life and liberty, need not the aid of human laws to be more effectually invested in every man than they are. Neither do they receive any additional strength when declared by the municipal laws to be inviolable. On the contrary, no human legislator has power to abridge or destroy them unless the owner shall himself commit some act that amounts to a forfeiture. So there are laws, it's kind of like natural laws. You have the law of gravity, right? Now, you can try to break the law of gravity, but chances are you're going to lose, right?
Yes. You can find ways to overcome it temporarily.
It's like, as long as I'm standing on solid ground, the law of gravity has no effect on me in the sense that, I'm not going to be punished by the law of gravity, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm up on top of a building and I don't have a jetpack or a Back to the Future
Yes.
skateboard or something, if I step off the side of the building, I immediately forfeit my body to the law of gravity for the punishment that I'm about to receive.
Yeah.
But in another way, we do have laws, like we have the law that manslaughter is punishable, but with justice, right? So hey, as long as I'm not committing manslaughter, then that law is not, I'm not forfeiting my life to the punishment of that law, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the minute someone commits manslaughter, then they essentially forfeit their life, they've forfeit their liberty, they've forfeit their pursuit of happiness, and now they're under this punishment that should be brought forth by a judge as he passes a judicial sentence on the person who committed manslaughter, right? And so that's what Blackstone is saying here, is that these rights are yours until you forfeit them by breaking some law. But I like the way that he says it here, that these natural rights, such as our life and liberty, need not the aid of human laws to be more effectually invested in every man.
Right.
In other words, these rights, these natural rights, are already effectually invested in every single person. And there's no law that has to somehow make that stronger. It's as strong as can possibly be.
Yeah, that's important, right? So every human, it's not like you have two humans, one has every ounce of unalienable rights, they're born with, but another one comes out of the womb and they got 90% of unalienable rights. Oh, you need a little bit of help there, buddy? Let me give you a boost.
Yeah.
It's nothing like that. No, every human is endowed, they're born with everything that they need in order to enjoy these unalienable rights.
And here's one way that we know that's true, is that wherever you go where there's mass executions that are unjust, typically the people being executed were redefined as subhuman, or less than, or second-class citizens of some sort. Even like tribes that still engage in cannibalism, they don't really see themselves as eating others who are equal to them.
Right.
Because in the mindset of the cannibal, it's like, this tribe, these are true people, and if we conquer another tribe or capture someone and consume them, it's like there's something less than
they don't enjoy the
what
rights
we
that we
are.
have.
Right. And we saw that with Hitler and the Jews. He redefined the Jews as subhumans. And then from there, convince the people that it's okay to gas them. It's okay to torture them and kill them, because it's like, killing an animal. These are subhumans. They're not real humans.
Same thing with the eugenics movement, Margaret Sanger.
Same thing with eugenics and abortion.
Yep.
Is that, the fetus in the womb isn't really a human yet. It's more like a tumor. It's more like, just a growth that has the potential of robbing you of future blessings. So,
But something has to be removed, meaning the assumption is all these people understood it was already there, but I need to find a way to convince people to remove that aspect.
Right.
And then I'm free to do whatever I want with that population.
They're finding a loophole around this self-evident, unalienable right to life. They have to figure out some loophole that allows them to disregard what we know to be true about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Just to take this out a little bit further, though, just to give you a few more unalienable rights, I found a pretty cool list in a book called the 5,000 Year Leap. And here's the list that they present of unalienable rights: the right of self-government, the right to bear arms for self-defense, the right to own, develop, and dispose of property, the right to make personal choices, the right of free conscience, the right to choose a profession, the right to choose a mate, the right to beget one's kind, the right to assemble, the right to petition, the right to free speech, the right to a free press, the right to enjoy the fruits of one's labors, the right to improve one's position through barter or sale, the right to contrive and invent, the right to explore the natural resources of the earth, the right to privacy, the right to provide personal security, the right to provide nature's necessities, which are air, food, water, clothing, and shelter, the right to a fair trial, the right of free association, and the right to contact. Or contract, I think that I should say. So here's, here is this list of other unalienable rights, because remember, in the Declaration of Independence, it says, among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so those are the big ones. But then, from that flow a lot of others, So like if I have the right to life, then I also have the right to protect my life.
Yeah.
And I have the right to provide personal security. And I have the right to bear arms. And I have the right, to make these personal choices of what kind of guns I want to keep in my house. So thankfully, I don't have the weaponry for a true insurrection, which I believe are F-16s and nuclear bombs.
Yes.
But
I heard Arnold Schwarzenegger owns a tank. He's closer than we are.
Thanks a lot. But
I think he would say, I was endowed.
I hear he has a chopper too.
Endowed.
Get to the chopper.
Good old Arnold.
So yeah, you see the unalienable right to life, and then there's things that logically flow from that right. The right to liberty. There's things that logically flow.
They spring forth from
that right of liberty, right? There's liberty would include free speech then, a free press, the right to contrive and invent, the right to privacy and these sorts of things, right? The unalienable right to the pursuit of happiness, that comes with, I have the right to choose a mate. I have the right to choose the profession that I want to, so this list of unalienable rights, really kind of flow from those three that the founding fathers saw fit to list in the Declaration of Independence.
Right. And, one thing that, we were talking about earlier also is the distinction between rights that we are endowed with, which, again, this list is a good list of things that logically flow from. And, these also set the tone for what would now become the Bill of Rights. So that's where we have the free press, freedom to assemble, petition, the right to bear arms, and then the list of the Bill of Rights after that, right?
Yes.
But notice that a couple of points here. Number one, the fact that there's a distinction between things that we enjoy as inherent rights, things that we are born with, natural rights. And now there seems to be a confusion arising that we're calling a lot of things rights today that are really just privileges or freedoms that we enjoy.
They're vested rights.
Yeah. So, or, the terminology being used at the time was negative versus positive rights.
Unalienable rights are negative rights. And it's basically, you don't get to come and do this to me.
Yeah.
Right? So it's negative in that sense that you don't have the right to rob me of this.
I can't give it to you. You already have it.
Yeah.
But I also can't infringe or violate that.
Whereas the positive rights or the vested rights, those are more like the laws that, like one example I think that I could give is the minimum wage law. So the unalienable right is that you have the freedom to pick a profession according to what makes you happy.
As part of the pursuit of happiness.
Part of the pursuit of happiness, I can go pick the profession that I enjoy. And I can go and do that job, right?
And I can agree to whatever I want to get paid for it.
So then I can enter into a contract. The right to contract is one of those rights, that I can enter into a work-based contract to work at this place doing this job that I love for this amount of money, right? Then the government comes along and says, well, we're going to make sure that people are at least making a minimum wage, which hopefully is a living wage, right? So the government comes in and says, well, we're going to set this as the minimum wage. And then they can turn around and say, well, we're going to change the minimum wage. and we're going to make it this much now, right? And then someone could come along and say, yeah, but you have to raise the minimum wage to this because this should be one of our rights. It's like, well, hold on a second. You know, the government doesn't get to come in and tell an employer how much he has to pay an employee unless it's just by, you know, government fiat or by, you know, by this vested right that they're kind of forcing upon, you know, the employers of this given society, right? So you can't take away someone's right to enter into a contract with an employer. You can't take away someone's inalienable right to pursue the profession that pleases them. You know, but governments can step in and say, you know, this is the minimum wage, and force an employer to pay that amount. And they can come along and change that if the votes go that way, right? And so that's really kind of the difference. It's like you have the right to pursue health. You have the right to pursue health care. You have the right to pursue
education,
diet and exercise. I mean, these are your rights. These are, you know, you've been endowed with the right to pursue a healthy lifestyle. But that's different from the right to health care. And there's one of the big sticking points is that, you know, many people in our society today want to equate the right, you know, to cheap health care. You know, they want to say that has to be an unalienable right. It's like, well, no, you have the right to pursue a healthy lifestyle. You have the right to not eat at McDonald's. You have the right to go and do exercise. You have the right to try to be healthy. But you don't have the right to go and force some doctor to take a pay cut so that you can afford their service. But the government can step in and all of a sudden start enforcing laws about, you know, health care and insurance and these sorts of things.
Yeah.
But it's not inalienable. You know, it's a positive right that could easily be taken away.
Right.
And could easily change.
What the government gives, the government can easily take away.
Most
right?
certainly.
Now, I can already anticipate a couple of, you know, responses, right? Number one would be, well, you know, you're talking up here, but really as Christians, right, is this something that is biblically based? This idea of, well, you know, God being a caring God, a loving Father, wouldn't he want his children to be taken care of, right? So talking about, let's stick with the healthcare example, right? Shouldn't this be something that we want to make sure that everybody has access to, you know, because obviously there are some that cannot afford health insurance or health care, and they seem to be left out in the cold. Wouldn't a loving God want all of us to be taken care of? Therefore, if we have a government that we can, you know, put in place and vote our interests, isn't this something that we actually want to achieve?
Yeah, it really comes down to the question of legislating morality. And then the question would then be, what's your basis for morality?
Yeah.
So what is it that is driving your decisions and whatnot? So for example, you know, we do have a government where we can vote for people and hopefully see the people that we vote for get elected and then begin to implement policies that they were platforming, you know, had on their platform and that we were polling for. And so, you know, and going through that whole political process, which has been set up here in America, is a wonderful thing, especially when it works out in our favor, right?
Yeah.
But then that doesn't always work out that way. And we might see the policies and the platforms that we were voting for, you know, disappear before our very eyes, right? So that's just the nature of the political system here in America. So then the question is, you know, should Christians want to legislate morality so that people could have, you know, affordable health care, so that people could have, you know, the ability to, you know, make a living wage, you know, where they work and these sorts of things. And to that, I would say, yes, of course. But then the problem comes along with, these government bills that, are a foot thick and nobody can read before, it's voted upon. And there's so many things shoehorned, into that bill that has everything to do with healthcare. And yet, also $1 million is going to go to Iran and, $10 billion that are, it's just like, the government plays these games that, keep us from just having simple votes on simple things so that we can see what's being passed and agree or disagree with it. Everything's got to be like, tagged on and to these bills, and it's just, there's such manipulation on both sides of the aisle that people lose heart, lose hope, and a lot of people just give up on the government altogether.
Yeah, and again, going back to our a little bit to the introduction, that the founding fathers knew that this is probably what government's going to turn into.
Yeah.
Even the government that they set up, because they knew that once you have a little bit of taste of that power, a little taste of the glory, see what it tastes like.
Yeah.
You're not going to give it up.
Yeah.
And you will do everything in your power to hold on to that, which includes coming up with legislation that just is not in the good interest of the society as a whole,
right,
but is really just serving as my re-election campaign, right?
Yeah.
And I feel that we're getting very, very close to that point of like, man, is this republic going to die now?
Yeah.
Because people are so against now what the founding fathers initially had set up,
which was small government.
Mm-hmm.
And
hands off, laissez-faire was the was the phrase,
and that people come in as public servants, not
to serve the people.
Yes,
at the consent of the governed,
and not to come in and get wealthy, right? Mm-hmm. If we just started today with a policy that says anyone who has gotten wealthy in government is fired today, mm-hmm. like if we could just do that, we would see so many people that are problematic in government just disappear. Mm-hmm. If we set up policies that it's like, you're going to make minimum wage at this government job. Of course, we would immediately see minimum wage go up.
Let's pass a bill right away.
But if we saw real legislation that put caps and the ability to really monitor where money is ending up and how people who have been lifelong politicians like Bernie Sanders, mm-hmm. Here's a guy who entered into politics broke, sleeping on someone's couch, and now he has multiple houses, mm-hmm. working in the government. Where to get that? Where's this money coming from? Mm-hmm. And so, it typically happens through the redistribution of wealth as bills get passed and, money gets earmarked for various sorts of things, and that money gets moved to their constituents, and it's just wicked. It's just wicked. And I remember, being promised that, Obamacare was not going to change my policy. It wasn't going to change my, the price that I was paying for insurance. And
you can keep your doctor.
And I was going to keep my doctor and all that kind of stuff. And none of it was true. Not one thing that was promised through Obamacare was true. And my rates, I could no longer afford the rates, I had to lose the doctor, I had to lose the health care. Now I'm on a health share program, which I think is, better in the long run anyway. But, I got
jaded,
priced out.
Yeah,
I got priced out after this huge bill was passed, and health care here in America was essentially changed.
Yeah.
So that those who are paying for health care are paying now for those who aren't paying for health care, and yeah,
get it.
So I would love to see it work. Mm-hmm. I would love to see affordable health care, but then that's going to have to take some legislation that spanks those who are constantly suing doctors and without good reason, right?
Yeah.
Because you got insurance that's trying to make up for all these doctors that got sued for things that they may have done or may not have done, and it's just government has gotten so big that it's impossible for it to function properly.
Yeah,
impossible. And we need to get back to the original intent of our founding fathers, which is small government and public service, not people in there trying to make money.
Yeah, and so in keeping with that example of like healthcare, right? And I think again, that response was, as Christians, is this something that we want to really fight for? That this is, should we consider this a basic right? You know, are there principles in the Bible that we can figure out, okay, this is really what God's thinking about, this is what he's allowing his people to do, and this is what he's promoting? And I think we do see that, especially in the Old Testament. Number one, you know, when the founders wrote about life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, and I think one of our fellow people here was mentioning in the original draft, it was actually talking about personal property. You know, and we look throughout Scripture, and we actually do see a promotion and an assumption of personal property. Obviously, we have one of the 10 commandments, thou shalt not steal.
Right.
That, and we have several other verses and passages that just assume personal property, and there were civil ordinances, civil commandments from God given down to the people on how to deal with people who infringe on personal property violations. How do we deal with these people? How do we punish these people? And how do we hand out justice based on personal property violations? And so when we talk about healthcare, right, this I always bring this, we were talking about this earlier, I bring it up how, and you brought it up too, the moment you deem something a new natural right, you are now, there's unintended consequences.
Right.
You are now forcing a laborer to work for free, essentially, or work for something that they might not want to work for, that is not worth their time and effort. And so you've essentially enslaved that person. Now, in the Bible, again, we see these principles about, like, obviously you should not enslave another person.
Right.
And so we see these biblical principles. If you look hard enough, you'll see these crop up. And we're not, it's not about taking it out of context. They're just little principles that you notice here and there, that there's just basic assumptions about human life and being made in the image of God, and what are these natural rights. And this should help the Christian understand about how should we now turn those principles and what should we really be fighting for in legislation. And I would venture to say that what I see in the scriptures is that by and large, Christians should really be leading the helm, leading the efforts on solving these problems of poverty, solving these problems of healthcare from within the Christian community. Not necessarily looking to, you know, our first route shouldn't be, let's get the government to solve it. Let's get these people who have tasted power and now crave it. But God has given us tools and skills and reason in order to solve a lot of these problems within our own community. And that's really pointing back to our Creator.
And I think there's some balance to what you're saying here, because, you know, I understand the point that you're making, which is that welfare ought to take place within the Christian community, not between the government and a population. Right. So you know, the government in charge of welfare removes accountability. It removes, you know, people go down and stand in a line where they can lie about, you know, the jobs that they're applying for if they want to lie about it. You know, there's no, they can walk out of that door and go use that money on things that they shouldn't be spending their money on. There's no accountability when you have this huge government that is just taking taxpayer money and throwing it out the door to anybody that comes along and says, hey, I need, you know, government funding. Whereas, you know, if welfare was taking place within a spiritual community, there's accountability, you know, there's true checks and balances, there's relationship. You know, but then you got a bunch of people that don't belong to spiritual communities, right? So what do those people do? And it would actually kind of force them to go and learn how to be accountable, you know, within the context of, say, like a church. But so on the one side of things, it's just kind of like, yes, you know, the church should be functioning in such a way that each individual community is being cared for and looked after, and it's like our hospitality ministry. You know, as soon as, you know, someone is in the hospital and there's kids at home and a spouse that needs a little assistance, you know, our hospitality ministry springs into action and begins to go and care for that family in that time of need, right? We're not calling up, you know, President Biden and saying, hey, can you bring some food over to, you know, Sally Joe's house? Their kids are starving, you know. It's like, no, we as a church take care of that. We deal with that because these are people in our community. We're going to take care of them, right? So that most certainly should be happening. But then at the same time, I don't want people to leave the show tonight thinking that, well, Reuben and Bungie were saying that Christians shouldn't be involved in government.
Oh, no. Yeah, right.
right? Because that's false as well. We have the opportunity here in America to have a voice in our government, and we ought to. Our founding fathers even encouraged Christians to seek out Christian leaders to lead this Christian nation. Now, I wouldn't call America a Christian nation any longer. That day has far since gone, and one reason why is because Christians stopped getting involved in Christian politics. So I think that, Christian communities should be self-contained to a certain degree, that we're taking care of those in our community and making sure that, people have jobs and people are cared for and these sorts of things. But then at the same time, I think that every Christian should be invested in the government here in America, so that we can try to bring these self-evident truths back to light. And start, dealing with those who are trying to insert new rights that aren't really inalienable rights.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you hit the nail right on the head that we definitely should encourage this generation and future generations of Christians to get involved in the political process.
Right.
Not just in terms of running for offices, local and national level, but just having conversations within, and we talked about this in our Politics in the Bible episode, I believe, which go check out the YouTube channel for previous episodes.
Boom.
But in talks about we as Christians, we need to recognize that there is a great intersection between the worldview that God has given us and how it intersects with all areas of life. Not just our personal, what people like to say, how's your walk? How's your spiritual life doing? Well, my spiritual life really is it should be my life.
Yeah.
Everything that I put my hands to and think about and talk about should be revolving around how I think about God. And that includes the political sphere. And so we should be up to knowledge in a way about how to think about politics.
Right.
And that's where I see a trend, especially among the younger generation, Gen Z, and we've talked about this before again, that they're the most socially conscious generation, but they are the ones that are most vulnerable to making that mistake about basically turning every want into somehow a natural right.
Right.
That now needs government influence.
I want to go to college. I can't afford to go to college.
Right.
Therefore, it must be a right to go to college.
Right.
So now you're going to rob a professor of his income because you think the government should just give you free college?
Or force somebody who chose not to and chose another profession that
Right.
didn't need college to now pay for your college
Yeah,
education.
why should I, a high school dropout, pay for someone else to go to college when I didn't even pay for myself to go to college?
Right. So conversations like that, just knowledge like that really, as Christians, like I said, we should be at the helm. We should be at the forefront of leading these conversations and really building up our body of believers to be knowledgeable in these aspects, how to think biblically about all areas of life.
So what do you say then, to those who would say, well, you can't legislate morality?
Yes.
And you shouldn't be using the government, separation of church and state, you shouldn't use the government to try to force your Christian ethic on the rest of society. How does that play into the discussion of inalienable or unalienable rights?
Yeah, and I think this is something that you like to say, right, about, you're going to legislate morality either way. Every law that is passed, for the most part, like, what side of the road to, not excluding those, every law that, even those? Those
yeah.
Brits got it wrong also?
Oh, yeah,
Man,
it's sin. They are sinning every time they drive.
Got it, all right. So every law.
That's why you can't have nice things.
It's Brits with those gray skies, and I'll make other jokes.
And their tea.
Yes. Anyways, every law that is passed is legislating morality of one sort or another. The question really is, which morality?
Right.
Right?
Whose version of morality? Because, pretty much every law is some form of a legislation of morality. Every law basically says, this is right, this is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
That is a moral issue. So then comes the question about unalienable rights. Well, if you're believing in unalienable rights, doesn't that have to do with morality? And then comes the question, listen, if you don't believe in a creator God, then what do you use for justifying? What is your basis for believing in the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? Because to say that this is a right would be that the opposite then is wrong, which then stems from the oughtness argument that there's a way we ought to behave, there's a way we ought to live. And oughtness implies a moral standard that applies to everyone everywhere. So how can there be a universal moral code from which we have natural law that provides us with the ability to rationally and reasonably arrive at the conclusion that we are endowed with these unalienable rights? So if there is no God, then there is no moral code. If there is no moral code, then there's no natural law. If there's no natural law, then there's no basis for believing in unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Therefore, why do you think you deserve life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness if there is no God?
Boom. Done.
Game, set, match.
Game, set, match. Yeah. Nice. Yeah, that reminds me of several conversations I've had with students down at the UT Austin campus, where they are self-identifying atheists or naturalists. They don't believe in God, but yet they still want to hold on to objective morality.
Yeah.
And you got to ask them, well, I mean, how do you justify, basically, the way you speak on an everyday basis, when you make a judgment, you're basically contradicting yourself. When the moment you say you should or you should not, or I think everyone should, game, that's it, you're done. You're using objective moral language, and yet you don't believe in an objective moral reference point.
Right.
And so for these people, they just kind of like to brush aside the fact that, well, I don't believe, some will even say I'm a moral relativist. Okay, well.
So you mean you're immoral?
Yes.
Or amoral, really. I
Right.
mean, at the end of the day, you have to end up as an amoral person.
Right.
Who just makes up your own moral code as you go.
But at the very same time, they have at least one moral code that they believe should apply.
Right. No, they believe
universally.
They believe that morality applies universally. But because they have no foundation for believing it, at the end of the day, they really are amoral people who are just trying to force their own morality on everybody else without any justification for why they're right. Now, they can appeal to conventional wisdom. They can appeal to societal norms. They can appeal to utilitarianism. They can appeal to all of these things, but none of that actually justifies universal morality.
Yeah, and I've heard, people, because, they'll, around the same time that these ideas that the founding fathers were influenced by, right? There was Kant's moral imperative that for a while seemed to be the answer, the loophole of not having God as the foundation for morality.
Yeah.
So Kant's moral imperative basically viewed human beings as an end in and of themselves. So they were at the top of the hierarchy.
Right.
So anything that violated humans, at least, their will or their privacy or their personal property or anything like that was viewed as immoral.
But what's to stop me from just saying I'm just a little bit higher a human than you?
Yeah. Exactly.
and based in Darwinian evolution, if I'm stronger than you and I'm better than you and I can kill you and take what you own, who's to say that's wrong or it's bad?
Right.
Why is that a bad thing if that's how we got here?
Yeah.
If Darwinian evolution is how we ended up here, then it happened through a series of the strongest of a species dominating and spreading its seed, further than the weaker. Mm-hmm. So why would we put a cork in that bottle?
Yeah.
Why don't we just allow the purge to be reality?
Yeah.
and at least, once a year, just, have a free-for-all, and we just get rid of the weak
Yeah.
and allow our species to continue evolving to whatever we turn into next, right?
Yeah.
But nobody believes that. No, they smuggle in Christian morality and then try to leave out the Christian God.
Yeah.
So, I would just point you back to John Locke, who assured us that natural rights basically flow from natural law, and natural law originates with God. Here's the way that John Quincy Adams put it, July 4th, 1821. He said, "The highest glory of the American Revolution was this: it connected in one indissoluble bond the principles of civil government with the principles of Christianity. From the day of the Declaration, they," speaking of the American people, "were bound by the laws of God, which they all, and by the laws of the gospel, which they nearly all acknowledged as the rules of their conduct." So he's pointing back to 1776. He's pointing back to the American Revolution, followed by this new form of government that's being formed, with the Declaration of Independence being one of our foundational documents. And he's pointing to all of this and says, from the day of that declaration, the American people were bound by the laws of God, not the laws of utilitarians, not the laws of atheists who want to smuggle in Christian morality without the Christian God. No, he says that they're bound by the laws of God, which they all, and by the laws of the gospel, which they nearly all acknowledged as the rules of their conduct. The laws of God coupled together with, the laws of the gospel, which, I'm guessing he's suggesting love God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself, the two greatest commandments, are the rules of the conduct that the government ought to be enforcing. Mm-hmm. Here's how the U.S. Supreme Court in 1884 weighed in on this as well. So this is U.S. Supreme Court, 1884. "These inherent rights have never been more happily expressed than in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that is so plain that their truth is recognized upon their mere statement, that all men are endowed, not by edicts of emperors, or by decrees of Parliament or acts of Congress, but by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and to secure these, not grant them, but secure them, governments are instituted among men." Governments are supposed to secure the unalienable rights that God gave us. That's the job of government. And that's what Paul says in Romans 13, that the government is here, raised up by God to punish evildoers. The government is supposed to be securing our unalienable rights that were given to us by God. So then if you want to turn around and say, well, we don't need to legislate Christian morality, okay.
What are you left with?
Well, what do you want? You want no right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness?
Yeah.
You want tyrants to come in and, at their will and in their pursuit of pleasure, decide who gets to live and who doesn't?
Yeah.
I mean, just go back a few centuries to to the days of Mao Zedong and Zedong and Marx and Hitler and Stalin, and just go look at how many millions of people died under their tyranny.
Yeah.
And the reason why is because they didn't want to legislate Christian morality either. They wanted to come in and determine who has the right to life and who doesn't. And the numbers prove it.
Yeah.
So there's your communism.
Yes. So, that response to don't legislate your Christian morality. And that's something that's just been widespread. These are just more like tropes these days, though they're tropes to people who know better, but there is a good number of people who have just bought into this lie.
It's a
You know-
pop level
Yeah.
acceptance that sounds good. I can throw that on my Facebook and then dismiss the Christians
You know,
that I know.
it's almost on that level, or similar to that level of the person who denies Jesus existed, right? It only exists in these, Reddit forums where there's no serious scholarship that really believes this. Because you look at the letter that Jefferson wrote to that Baptist church, right? And it's clear in his language that he's saying, the government is supposed to be, we're supposed to protect the church from the government, or the people from the government. And these things are just, to use the language here, self-evident.
Yeah.
So it's amazing how these bad historical, tropes get passed around. And yet again, we're here hopefully to clear up a lot of this mess. So as far as don't legislate Christian morality, hopefully we're really, getting that point through that Christian morality, that is morality. That is the way that God has designed this world. And we were talking about this earlier about how the pursuit of happiness, where some, again, where we get down into this, we go down these rabbit trails of, well, I want this certain group of people who have a certain orientation to have certain rights because we're pursuing liberty and happiness. Why shouldn't we engage in that? They want to pursue happiness. That's part of the unalienable rights. How do we respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, that was the focus of my my daily video that I produced earlier this morning. And the concept there is that, well, if I have the right to pursue happiness, then why do Christians, like zero in on things that make some people happy? And treat it as something that they shouldn't engage in. You think about, just all the sexual immorality happening in the world today, or the specific kinds of lifestyles that are in conflict with, biblical morality. Well, if I have the right to pursue happiness, then why don't I have the right to pursue those things, right? And to that, it's important to understand that in the pursuit of happiness, if this is a right that comes to us from our Creator, then listen, if you have these natural laws that come from a creator, then chances are there are divine laws as well. Or in other words, if there are natural laws, there are probably also spiritual laws. It only stands to reason because we are natural beings and we are spiritual beings. Mm-hmm. So, as we reason our way to understanding natural law, we begin to discover the identity of the Creator who gives us the natural laws. And as we discover the identity of the Creator in the Word of God, we start realizing that there are spiritual laws that put up boundaries to keep us from entering into sin that might be pleasurable for a moment, but ends up in bondage and even in punishment and everlasting punishment for those who refuse to repent. So, in the pursuit of happiness, we have to first define what is happiness.
Yep.
What do we mean when we say happiness, right? Another way to look at this is, that like eating donuts all day will make me happy.
Yeah, can it just be something that makes me happy?
Yeah. So, just eating donuts for breakfast, lunch, and dinner would make me happy. Mm-hmm. Would it make me healthy? And then at the end of that road,
are you still?
Am I still happy?
Yeah.
After years of abusing my body with these fat pills, mm-hmm. right? So I can say that I'm pursuing happiness by eating donuts every day for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, but someone who is more reasonable will look at the end of that road and say, what, this decision to try to be happy today is going to result in lots of problems in the future. So if you want lasting happiness, don't look for the temporary pleasure, but rather try to find out what is healthy so that you can be healthy and happy in the future, right? On a spiritual level, we also see, like, there's certain things that will destroy a person's life, like sexual immorality. You're sinning against yourself. It might be pleasurable in the moment. I don't think anybody's going to make the case that, sexual sin is not pleasurable, or, no one's going to say that sexual immorality is going to rob you of immediate happiness. And there's a lot of people who are happy in the moment of pursuing sexual immorality. But the scriptures are quite clear that the ongoing pursuit of sexual immorality results in, bondage. It results in, it's going to result in mental issues. It's going to result in a conflict with you and God, as well as you and mankind. So the immediate pleasure needs to be set aside for the lasting happiness that the Lord has for us. So the pursuit of happiness, it's an unalienable right that needs to also be understood within the context of God's divine law. And this is where, we need to take the natural law by which we receive unalienable rights here in this world and then begin to set up those safety barriers by using the divine law that we find in the scriptures that provide us with that narrow path of righteousness that the Lord is calling us to walk. So that as we walk that narrow path of righteousness, the Lord is then helping us to live a life that's pleasing to Him as we enjoy the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Yeah. And, I can already hear people responding, just Christian morality in general is just too legalistic. It's too narrow. I can't have any fun, as it were. But to that, I probably want to say, again, like what you're saying, that God has designed this universe, but also humans, to operate in such a way that if you live your life and it's characterized by living within those God-given boundaries, you will, to quote Osteen, have your best life now, right?
Wow. I don't even know what to say to that.
So, point is, though, that God has
What
set
is
up
the
these.
point?
Yeah, God has given us these boundaries to live in that we have to think long term and say, He's designed us in such a way that if we live within these boundaries, that is true joy. That's spoken of in the Bible, right? It's been said that happiness is really just a fleeting feeling, whereas joy is a status, a state of being, regardless of the circumstances.
Right.
So even though I am enduring trials or physical illness or ailments or whatever, but I am living, my life is characterized by living within God's will, I can still be joyful.
Right.
That's something that Paul wrote about.
Yeah.
Not only that, but you look at just history and you just look at the results of people that have been living hedonistic lifestyles. It reminds me of King Solomon, right? Where he wrote in Ecclesiastes, all is vanity. He's tried everything. He had the 700 concubines, 300 wives, and more than that. And he says, it's all vanity.
Yep.
It's all vanity.
It wasn't happiness. At the end of the road,
Yep.
he wasn't this just completely satisfied, happy person. He was, more like the Rolling Stones saying, I can't get no satisfaction.
Yeah.
I've tried, but I just can't, And the Rolling Stones, in a similar way, they basically, they lived the sex, drugs, and rock and roll lifestyle at the highest level of success and still can't get no satisfaction.
Yeah. And you look at, Rome, right? The things that they allowed their people to engage in,
Right.
Pederasty, homosexuality.
Yep.
But you look at the results of that, and they were a society that, sure, they had a lot of power. Obviously, they fell, but culturally speaking, they were just degraded.
Yeah.
They had nothing to offer but just hedonism. Whereas Christianity comes along, and you look at the results historically of that. There's a great book I was reading. It's called Dominion by Tom Holland, and he's not even a believer. I think he's an agnostic, but he wrote this large book explaining that wherever Christianity went throughout history, it changed society for the better. You have hospitals being built, the sick being taken care of.
Yeah.
You have educational systems being built. That's where we got our first universities from, that have now turned to godly universities now. But wherever Christianity goes, there's a positive influence because we are trying to point people to live and characterize their lives using those God-given boundaries that we find in God's Word, right?
That book, Dominion, was it written by a Venezuelan No,
Yeah, yeah.
Wrong dominion? Different
Yeah,
dominion. Okay,
yeah.
different
This one,
dominion.
this one doesn't have errors. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, really good point that I'd like to kind of take it a little bit further, just to understand where our unalienable rights come from, because I would even take it out further than just endowed by our Creator, right? Which is true. We are endowed with unalienable rights because this is what our Creator has determined. But does He determine this because this is just what He chooses and He could have chosen something else? Mm-hmm. Or did He determine these unalienable rights for us, because it's His very character? And I would just point out that, the Lord has given us the unalienable right to life because God is life, right? So it only makes sense for Him to then endow us with life because He is life. John says of Jesus that all things were made through Him, and without Him nothing was made that was made. In Him was life, and the life was the light of men. So God gave us unalienable rights, the right to life, because He is life. He's also the source of liberty. In Galatians 5, Paul says, "Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty by which Christ has made us free, and do not be entangled again with a yoke of bondage." And so God has granted us the unalienable right of liberty, because He is the source of true freedom. And then God is the one who blesses us with everlasting happiness, because He's the one who, in Himself, He is blessed. He is the blessed God. And within Himself, He fulfills Himself in self-containment. He needs nothing beyond Himself, and is completely blessed within His own being, and then turns around and says, I'm going to pass this blessing down. And then determines based on His own blessed state that He wants to bless us with the unalienable right so that we can pursue happiness in the hopes that we might grope for Him and find Him, though He's not far from each one of us.
Yeah.
And so these unalienable rights not only were granted, but it actually reveals more about the God that gave us the rights.
Yeah. And, that also points us to the fact that it is ultimately God to whom we belong.
Right.
The fact that He is the source of life and source of liberty means that He is the author of those things, meaning He can take them away if He wishes.
Right.
I'm reminded of Job. I believe it's when he's conversing with his wife, but he says that God has given and God has taken away.
Blessed be the name of the Lord.
And that's His prerogative.
Right.
God needs to give us no reason to why He does the things He does, but we know that in His nature He is good, and in His nature He is righteous, and therefore the commandments that He gives us to carry out are good.
Yeah.
He is the source of morality.
Well, even on the day when Jesus will condemn those whose names are not written in the book of life to the second death of everlasting torment in the lake of fire, that is a good decision. Mm-hmm. It's a good decision. And the reason why is because this is how God is going to tackle the problem of evil. God is going to solve the problem of evil by taking those who would not repent of their wicked ways and placing them in prison, if you will, into an eternal prison, where they will receive the just punishment that they deserve for all of their sins, right? That is a good thing. And while this does rob them of the everlasting life that He wanted to give them, this does rob them of the liberty as they're placed in an everlasting prison. This does rob them of the pursuit of happiness because no one's going to be happy in the lake of fire. And yet, it's God's decision to take those unalienable rights from them because of their decision to reject the free gift of forgiveness that Jesus purchased there on the cross when He died in our place.
Yep.
Yeah.
So all of these things are just kind of weaved in together in just one great story.
Yeah.
But that is something that we're living out right now as Christians. Again, we need to recognize how even when we consider these historical, foundational, political documents, that as Christians, we have a say in this. We have a great tradition, a great history, but also the authority to speak on these topics unalienable rights. We have that grounding. We're the only ones that have that grounding.
Right.
And so we need to go forth and speak these truths and convince people, look, this is what God has, this is how he's designed us, and he's allowed us to have somewhat of a new form of government that has worked out really well, and which is just in degradation right now. But now we need to do something about that. But again, all lining up within God's word.
Yes.
Now, I might also step on some libertarian toes here, but one thing we need to recognize also is the fact that, again, we belong to God. And so for those who want, maybe some Ayn Rand supporters here also, we don't belong to ourselves. And so whenever we are trying to influence with using political influence, we need to recognize that first and foremost, we're being held accountable to God. That's because that's where our unalienable rights come from. And so I know that there are certain sects of politics that will basically say it's the individualism. That's the Ayn Rand era. That basically it's self-interest above all. When in reality, as a Christian, we really shouldn't be thinking that way. As Christians, I'm reminded again of 1 Corinthians 12, where he talks about how we're all members, we're different members, but we make a one body, and the head is Jesus Christ.
Like Voltron.
Yes, I can't do the voice. I wish I could. The point is that as Christians, we always need to keep that at the forefront, that we belong to God.
Right.
He has purchased us. He has created us, and we're held accountable to him. And so whatever decisions that we want to make that are going to influence not only our lives, but society as a whole, we need to make sure that it lines up with our Creator's will.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's good. Good stuff.
Yeah. So I want to take a pause here. I know we've been talking for quite a while, but I do want to just remind you guys, you're watching Studio 118 on YouTube or Facebook or Austin Cable Access Channel 11. Thank you for tuning in. We're almost here at the end of our discussion and opening it up for Q&A. And so we invite you, jump on the live chats, send in your questions, anything related to what we've been talking about tonight, about unalienable rights, Declaration of Independence, American Revolution, all that sorts of stuff. Where do our rights come from? We'd love to respond and have a good conversation with you all. So jump on the live chat, send in your questions. If you want to call in your question, you can. It's 512-576-5433. We'll queue up your question. Again, I just want to remind you, we're streaming here live at Calvary South Austin in Austin, Texas, where we have in-person services on Sundays and Wednesdays, Sunday mornings at 9:15 and 11:15 a.m., and also on Wednesday evenings at 7 p.m. And don't forget, this Sunday, it is July 4th. We're going to have a special Independence Day message about the very topic we're talking about tonight, unalienable rights. And Bungie will go into further detail about our unalienable rights and its relationship to our Creator and how we enjoy those and how we can enjoy abundant life with our Creator. So if you're interested in that, feel free to drop on by here at Calvary South Austin in Austin, Texas. You can go to calvarysouthAustin.com as well to listen to a few of our messages. And also, as Bungie mentioned, he does a daily Word for the Day video. I believe it has its own YouTube channel, so check that out on YouTube, the Word for the Day, featuring Bungie. So jump on YouTube for that. For right now, we're going to continue our conversation discussing unalienable rights and where they come from, just showing that Christianity is truly the answer for this. So let's continue. I know that we did want to touch on that. So we've touched on where they come from, right? I think we've kind of, hammered that. It's not coming from moral relativism. It's not coming from, just brute facts about the universe. It's not being given to us by people in power or utilitarianism or anything of that sort. But it truly is coming from the source of all life, which is God, right? But I know we did want to touch on another topic, which was the balance of the Romans chapter 13 passage and how it relates to, this Declaration of Independence. And maybe you want to set the stage for that.
Sure. So when you look at what happened here in America prior to the Declaration of Independence, we see, this battle happening between King George and the Brits and the colonizers here, in America, and the conflict that they were having over taxation without representation and other issues. And so here's a group of Christians. Most of them were Christians. And they're making these plans, that they're engaging in this, revolution, this war, with the Brits. And then the question is, well, how do they square that with Romans chapter 13?
Yeah.
You have that text open?
Yeah. Let me go ahead and read it. So this passage is Romans chapter 13. It's the first 7 verses of that chapter. And here Paul writes, "Let every soul be subject to the governing authorities. For there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authority resists the ordinance of God, and those who resist will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Do you want to be unafraid of the authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. For he is God's minister to you for good. But if you do evil, be afraid. For he does not bear the sword in vain, for he is God's minister, an avenger to execute wrath on him who practices evil. Therefore you must be subject, not only because of wrath, but also for conscience sake. For because of this you also pay taxes, for they are God's ministers attending continually to this very thing. Render therefore to all their due, taxes to whom taxes are due, customs to whom customs, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor." So it seems that he's basically letting the early church there know that, hey, just obey government. Don't try to cause some sort of revolution or usurpation, but they're there for a purpose.
Right.
And so don't try to cause ruckus and stir things up.
Yeah.
You're going to set a bad example.
Peter also weighs in on this, 1 Peter chapter 2. "Submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether to the king as supreme or to governors, as to those who are sent by him for the punishment of evildoers and for the praise of those who do good. For this is the will of God, that by doing good you may put to silence the ignorance of foolish men, as free, yet not using liberty as a cloak for vice, but as bondservants of God. Honor all people, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the king." So a very similar language, to what Paul was writing there in Romans chapter 13. And while Peter was writing to those of the dispersia, which is the Jews that were scattered all throughout the world, Paul was specifically writing to the church there in Rome under Emperor Nero, who was just a vicious tyrant. And so there's two different contexts that are, of people who are receiving the same basic encouragement, which is submit to government, do what's right, and be good citizens so that you can focus on the Great Commission and leading people to Jesus, right? So then how do you square, these clear instructions found in the epistles with the actions of these Christian leaders here in America back during the 17th century? And 18th century, so it was late 17th, early 18th century, right? So how do you square these events with the scriptures? Were they disobeying? Were they disregarding the word of God? Yeah, I mean, some would argue yes. Some would, see 1 Peter 2, Romans 13, and they would say, well, clearly the leaders who, founded that first American government on the Declaration of Independence, they were clearly living in sin. Okay, I mean, that is one possibility, right? But another possibility is that the Lord was actually leading them to break those bonds according to the unalienable rights that they produced, right? So if you go back to Romans chapter 13, you see there where Paul is actually describing the purpose of human government, which is to protect the good citizen, right? Let every soul be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. So that you see God's sovereign hand on human government, and then he tells them not to resist the ordinance of God by resisting government. Don't do that. And then he says, because Rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Do you want to be unafraid of authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. He is God's minister to you for good. Now, what do you do when the government is no longer doing what is good? What happens when the government is punishing the good and rewarding the evil? Are they still in line with the will of God? And you could make the argument that, King George and his government, was far down that road of no longer leading in a way that was pleasing to God, and that God led the founding fathers of America to rebel, to break those bonds according to the unalienable rights that allowed them to pursue life, liberty, and happiness.
In the same way that in the Old Testament we see kings being raised and brought down.
Sure.
A lot of them were brought down because, they made altars
Yeah.
in the high places and whatnot.
Daniel tells us in his book that, God is the one who changes times and seasons. He's the one who raises up kings and brings them down. Nebuchadnezzar confirmed it. The king of Babylon confirmed that, yes, God is the one who raises up kings and brings them down. So, we certainly see different ways that happens. Is it always wrong to rebel against the government? No, it's not. We see many situations, where, Christian leaders in the New Testament are taking a stand against authorities. I think about when the apostles were arrested and brought before the high priest, and they tried to, basically scare them into the cessation of spreading the gospel. And Peter is like, we're going to obey God, not man. So when there's a conflict between what God is saying and what man is saying, when that conflict is there, the Christian is called to obey God, even if it means rebelling against government. So that's not me calling for insurrection. That's not me, saying that this is the time to do such a thing. I'm just saying that, biblically speaking, that when the government is, leading in such a way that is in conflict with the will of God, God inevitably is going to raise up leaders to bring down that sinful government.
And he can use various methods also.
Sure.
Right? He can just bring their plans, supernaturally to brought down to the ground so that they don't accomplish whatever they're set out to accomplish.
And we also see examples like in the story of Jonah, where a government receives the rebuke, repents, and then God relents of the destruction that he was intending to bring upon that nation. So the leader of Nineveh, he immediately repented once he heard the warning of Jonah, repented, called for everyone to repent, called for even the animals to sit in sackcloth and ashes as a sign of repentance. And then God relented of the destruction that he intended to bring upon the people of Nineveh. So we certainly see that, hey, a government can turn things around too, before, God, brings in the, brings down the hammer, so to speak, But when we look back to, the initial Congress and the leaders that founded our nation, I don't think that they were in conflict with Romans 13. I don't think that they were in conflict with Peter. I think that they were doing what God was leading them to do in response to King George III and his tyranny. And that the establishment of America was according to God's plan, not only to reach Native Americans with the gospel message, but also slaves that were coming, from Europe, from Africa. I believe that this was one of God's ways of bringing the gospel to people who would have never heard it. Think about that for a moment. We tend to think about what happened to the Native Americans in only negative terms. We tend to think about, the slave trade of Africa in only negative terms. And, without wanting to sound like I'm, yay, slavery and these sorts of things. Now, I'm definitely not saying that. But can God not work in evil things to accomplish his good? Of course he can. And so I think about, all of the people of color who came to know Jesus Christ as Savior, because of the evil slave trade. And Native Americans, including in my own family on my father's side. Native Americans who came to know Jesus, because of the Europeans who came over bringing the Middle Eastern gospel message of the Lord Jesus Christ. So God works in all of these things for his glory. And so it's important that we not get caught up in all of the, social issues of the day while we look for, tyrants and victims, in every racial group and try to, show our anger of what happened here in America and these sorts of things. It's like you can get caught up in the details and you can fail to see the forest, for the trees, right? Listen, we have a sovereign God who knows the beginning from the end, and he's working all things together for the good of those who love him and to those who are called according to his purpose. He made from one blood all the nations of the world to dwell on all the face of the earth. He's the one who predetermined the times and boundaries of their habitations, including the foundations of America and how it was formed, by the founding fathers. He's the one who had his hand on all of these things. He's the one who allowed Christian missionaries to come over and evangelize Native Americans who were here. He's the one who allowed the slave trade to take place, so that people of color, could come and hear the gospel message and be saved. So let's all just realize, that God is working all things together so that people might get saved, trust in Jesus Christ, get saved, and end up in heaven rather than being cast into the lake of fire.
Yeah. Yeah, that reminds me of the story of Joseph, right, in the book of Genesis. Yep. And, even his own brothers sold him into slavery. But he has a great redemption story, as it were, and when he reunited with his brothers, they were afraid of what he might do to them now that he has power, and he let them know, look, it's okay, God has put me here. What you meant for evil, God meant for good.
That's right.
He put me in this place in order to essentially save a whole bunch of people. And going to what you're saying, in a spiritual sense, we can still call out wrong when it's wrong, but two things can be true. Those things are morally reprehensible, and yet God still worked in that.
Yes.
It's that line, that question that God asks a whole bunch of people. It's like, are God's arms too short to to do things? Like he can still work wherever he wants. It's his creation. He's not surprised by any of this. But definitely he's powerful enough to work through any circumstance whatsoever. So yes, even when there were a bunch of flaws in these men that created these documents, they were still able to create a new form of government that really separated itself by many measures when you consider all the existing governments at that time, and then you look at the current governments that exist now, they're all trying to be this form of government, but they still can't quite get there.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of wisdom there, a lot of grace, and for sure a lot of sin, and yet God was able to still use that.
If America is as bad as the progressive leftists paint it out to be, why is there such a run at the border? Why are people jumping into little life rafts and traveling across shark-infested waters? Why are people, like, if socialism was so great, why aren't the people in the region of Venezuela rushing the borders in Venezuela where socialism is put in practice? Why is it that they say, oh, no, we're willing to go all the way up through territory where cartels are going to rip us off and women are going to get raped and children are going to get kidnapped, and we're willing to take that trek, from South America all the way up to the American border, so that we can go live amongst the most racist people in the world. Mm-hmm. It doesn't make sense. And it's just sad that, so many people fall for the lies of the progressive left who are, really pushing a false narrative so that they can continue to push their progressive agenda, all the while failing to realize that we have something real to celebrate this Sunday on July the 4th. We have something very real to celebrate. that God raised up a group of leaders, Christians, who were willing to risk everything to form a government which it zeroes in on protecting the unalienable rights of the citizens of this country.
Yeah. Yep. Amen to that.
Yeah.
Well, I think that does it, Bungie, for our discussion portion.
All right, I'm out of here.
Yep. See you later. So yeah, that's we're done with our discussion. We do have we're entering our Q&A time. We do have a couple questions lined up here, and so for probably the next less than 10 minutes, we'll be answering questions. So we got 2 queued up, but if you have any questions of your own, again, jump on that live chat or go ahead and call the church at 512-576-5433, and we will queue up your question, and we want to listen from you guys. So this first question is, let's see this. I was recently in a Zoom with 35 people.
Sounds fast.
Yeah. I was the only Christian. They wanted to abort every baby with Down syndrome. I stood against it. What's the best way to respond? Wow, that's hardcore. I would say at the very outset that just responding to a group of 35 people who are totally against you is one solid step to take. Just saying something, speaking up. I definitely understand, there's a lot of people who, when they get around a bunch of people who think like them, it's what's that called? You're just in an echo chamber, we just assume everybody agrees. This happens to me at work sometimes. There's conversations that happen that they just assume we believe the same things, right? But just saying something, in disagreement might go a long way to just helping people understand, oh, there's another opinion that I need to consider. But you might have something else to say.
Well, I agree with you, most certainly. But I would tend to approach that in more of an inquisitive way.
Yeah.
Of, well, what about? Right? So, as a conversation like that might unfold, and knowing that, these angry wolves could turn on me in a
More than
heartbeat.
likely.
Yeah. That there might be some questions that you have in the can, loaded up, ready to go, as I tend to have, some, quality questions that don't force an opinion into the conversation, but rather just cause people to stop, pause, and to consider what is it that we're saying here? What is it that we're really saying? That people with Down syndrome don't have the right to life? Mm-hmm. And so, one of the ways that you might address a group like that is to just say, well, where does the right to life come from? Like, before we go and start, killing a bunch of babies, what is the basis for the right to life? Or you might ask, does somebody who is less than us deserve to die because of that?
Yeah, are they not human? Can we ask that question first?
Yeah.
Are we
great.
really considering killing humans? And I know typically the emotional appeal is, well, they're not going to have that quality of life that we enjoy right now.
Right.
Who's to say?
Have you met anybody with Down syndrome?
Yeah.
Because I have.
Yeah.
I've actually known several people with Down syndrome. My mom used to take, when I was a kid, she helped out at a foster home that, really took in a lot and focused in on kids with Down syndrome. And me and my siblings would go over and help out, oftentimes. And I developed a lot of close friendships with people with Down syndrome. And if they were experiencing some lesser quality of life, they didn't know it.
Yeah.
They were having a blast. So to say that, somebody with Down syndrome is going to have a reduced quality of life, well, according to who? It's like if you grew up in a house with air conditioning and then you moved somewhere, that has no air conditioning, you're going to miss that air conditioning.
Yeah.
But if you grew up in a house without air conditioning and you move somewhere where there's no air conditioning, what are you missing?
Yeah.
You never knew any different, right? So the person who is born with Down syndrome, this is the life they know and enjoy. I worked Special Olympics 1 year, back in the 90s, and it was a blast. And those kids were having a blast. It was incredible. I won most of the races, but
Very good.
But go to a Special Olympics and tell me that those kids with Down syndrome are not having the best time of their life.
Yeah.
They are.
Now, just to back up, right? Even so, even if they did not have the quality of life, even if they, let's say a kid was just in pain for a good amount of their life.
Sure.
That still should not give us the right to go and tell them you don't have the right to live.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah, and so outside of the womb, because we're talking about abortion there, and one of the things I would bring up about that is that a diagnosis, with a child in the womb might not remain that way, or there's certainly situations where a child was diagnosed in a certain way and then the birth took place and it turned out that that wasn't the case.
Yep.
That there was a misdiagnosis, or so what if that mother would have aborted that baby and there was nothing wrong, right?
Yeah.
So you got to be careful with this abortion process, especially like the people who want to say that, well, for the life of the mother, if the life of the mother is being threatened, then abortion needs to be available, right? And most doctors will tell you that that's never really a situation anymore. There was a day and an age where that would have been, a real situation, but with medical advancements and technology, rarely is there a case where the life of the mother is actually at risk. And if it comes down to medicine that might kill the baby, well, you give the mother the medicine and pray that it doesn't affect the child. But if the medicine does affect the child, well, that's not an abortion per se. That's taking care of the mother, making sure she doesn't die of cancer or whatever the case. And if it negatively affects the child, that's accidental, not intentional, as abortion is. Abortion is intentional murder. Whereas, giving the mother medication that could affect the child, that's not intentional taking of life. But then back to the point that you were making, as far as like, so somebody is in a hospital bed and the quality of life, they're a vegetable, whatever the case.
Yep.
The thing that I would say about this is that I don't believe in prolonging life with technology. I don't think that's a requirement. So, if it does come down to that somebody is on a breathing tube and, their brain is shut down and they're just being kept alive with machines, I personally don't have a problem with the, pulling them off machines and allowing nature to take its course. I personally don't have an issue with that, and I've counseled people in the hospital to that very end. Family members who, are on life support and, they're believers and they're just being kept from heaven. So
Yeah.
if God wants to heal them, then by all means. Now, I wouldn't fault someone for keeping them on life support either. So I wouldn't take a strong stand against the people who would say they have to be on life support. If somebody feels strongly about that, then by all means, it's your family, it's your decision.
Yep.
But I personally don't think that that we have to prolong life just because we have the technology to do it.
Yeah, I understand. Well, for that questioner, first of all, we're gonna pause in a little bit. We're gonna continue our Q&A session after a little break. I have to sign off from Cable Access Channel 11. Stay on YouTube and Facebook. We'll catch you on the flip side. Take a break. All right, we're back. Thank you for sticking with us. We got some good questions here, so I wanted to make sure that we devote some time to them. Again, you're watching Studio 118. Thank you for sticking with us. We had to say bye to the people that were watching on Austin Cable Access Channel 11. Hopefully they were able to tune in here on YouTube and Facebook. But we were considering that question of the questioner asked, they were in a Zoom call and with 35 people, and they were all in support of aborting babies with Down syndrome. And so we were answering that. But I did want to just round that answer out and just let you know that we have touched, here on Studio 118, we do have an episode that dealt all with abortion. And I believe in that episode, we really did tackle pretty much every single kind of objection or reason that people give for engaging in elective abortion. So you might want to check that out. Again, that's on our YouTube channel. Go to Calvary South Austin YouTube channel and look at the Studio 118 playlist, and you'll find one on abortion that we've done in the past. And that also deals with how to respond. So you can have the facts, but then also how to engage in conversation with people who are putting forth these reasons. And so there's some good pieces of advice there. So I definitely empathize with the questioner there of it's tough to stand up to people who disagree with you, but there are some good tactics, some good ways to engage in a conversation that will hopefully convince people or at least give them something to think about. So check that past episode out. Let's go to our next question. We got a couple more. Number one, is it biblical to be a gun owner for the purpose of self/home defense? I'm not against guns, but wouldn't the keeping of a weapon be a form of putting our faith in horses? That's just a funny way to put it. I get it.
Oh, in chariots?
Yeah, in chariots and horses.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Some put their faith in princes, and some put their faith in bovine creatures. Or
I put my faith in Prince like it's 1999, but
nice.
That's another issue. I think Jesus said it best in Second Opinions chapter 3 when he told us to buy ARs and
stock up.
and
It's
lots
canonical.
Of ammo. If you get the 5.56, you can also shoot the 2.23. So just think about that before you purchase. But
are you sending Q drops? Is this what this is?
You went Q. Is that still a thing?
Yeah.
But storm's coming. But so
Delta variant.
Delta variant. I'm more worried about the American airline variant personally, but
Nice.
yeah, I've been trying to get some laughs out of that one, but
Yeah.
it's just falling short. Like
Delta works because they kick you out, man. They kick you out.
They do. They do.
They use force.
So I don't think that I wouldn't say that there's a verse that justifies being a gun owner per se. But I wouldn't say that having the ability to defend your property and home would be trusting in chariots, right? So for example, you look back to the kings of Israel, they had military with all the weapons of their time period. And the problem with the trusting in the chariots was when Israel started looking to Egypt and trusting in their chariots. So I think that it would probably be a little bit more of a parallel or an apples and apples comparison if we as Christians here in America were really hoping for some other military outside of America to come and defend us, against the army that God is raising up to come and punish us. Because that really is the context of, those who are trusting in the chariots. What I would point out, though, is there is dispensational truth in the scriptures that during the earthly ministry of Jesus Christ, we see a shift happening from the beginning of his earthly ministry to the end of it, and then entering into the church age, which begins with the day of Pentecost, and the full birth of the church happens then from Pentecost to the house of Cornelius, when the Gentiles were finally baptized with the Spirit, and then from there you have the beginning of the church age, and then it's the epistles that provide us with the doctrinal instructions for the church age. So if we really want to know, what the Lord is leading us to accomplish in the church age, we need to look to the epistles first, because that's the clear instruction, dispensationally speaking, for how we are to function as a church and as Christians. So having said that, though, I would appeal to something that Jesus said in Luke chapter 22. It's there at the end of his earthly ministry, where he says in Luke chapter 22, verse 35, he says to them, "When I sent you without money bag, without knapsack and sandals, did you lack anything?" They said, "Nothing." Then he said to them, "But now he who has money, let him take it, and likewise a knapsack, and he who has no sword, let him sell his garment and buy one." Now, this is just before, Peter takes off the ear of Malchus, with his sword there in the garden, and then he says, "Hey, those who live by the sword will die by the sword," right? And so there seems to be, like two sides of the same coin here, that we should have a sword, but we should be careful when we use it, because in that situation, it was the wrong time.
Yeah.
Jesus also said, if my kingdom were of this world, then my servants would fight, but, since my kingdom's not of this world, then I'm going to allow you to crucify me, basically, right? Mm-hmm. But that's contextual also, because, at the second coming, Jesus is coming back with a sword in his mouth, slaying the nations. Blood will be up to the bridle of his horse, so there's a whole lot of, of verses that kind of present us with a spectrum, that we have to really consider before we make these decisions. If a Christian were to say to me, that I'm going to buy a gun because I'm trusting in the gun to protect my home, I would say, well, you got a problem with faith there, because you really need to be trusting in the Lord. And as you trust in the Lord, nothing wrong with having some firepower. When Jesus says that if someone slaps you, or hits you, strikes you across the cheek, turn to them the other cheek. And a lot of people say, oh, we're supposed to be pacifists. Well, that's not what that means. The slap on the cheek was an insult. And we're not to return insult for insult. We're not to return injury for injury. But then that's different from self-defense. That's a lot different. Like, if somebody insults me, if somebody, robs from me and that sort of thing, I'm not supposed to go and get my own vengeance. But can I, as a Christian, defend my home against somebody that might try to break in and rape my wife and these sorts of things? I think that if I sat back and allowed my home to be ransacked and my wife to be, injured by some criminal, I think that I would be doing a disservice. So as for me in my house, mags are loaded. Yeah. It's like I don't want to start none, but I'm not going to sit back and allow criminals to have their way in my house.
Yeah, and I think that's usually the rub. From what I've seen, that people who are usually averse to guns in general, that they have this picture that when you have a gun, it's kind of like you're like Yosemite Sam, just shooting off everywhere all the time. Or that you just use it willy-nilly, and just having it on you is a form of intimidation even. But that's usually not the case, at least from all the gun owners that I know.
Right.
They understand the power that they're wielding, and they understand the responsibility that they have in order to protect themselves first and foremost, and then to protect others if it ever comes to that.
Yep.
Definitely, I don't see any contradiction there.
I don't think Christians should trust in guns, but I don't think there's a problem with Christians owning guns.
Yeah, got it. So the next question there is related to, you kind of touched on it already, is there a biblical basis for pacifism? And here specifically, refusing to serve in the military, which is very interesting. So you touched on turn the other cheek,
Yep.
But that was returning insult for insult. Now I do know so I've seen both. I've heard accounts of Christians who explicitly, because of their faith, it is their faith calling them to go and enlist to defend their country and the ideals that it stands for, because they're Christians.
Right.
But I've also heard the other spectrum, because of their Christian values, it has called them to withhold.
Yeah.
to stay out of that?
Yeah, I think that every Christian should recognize first and foremost that the Great Commission is our calling. The ministry of reconciliation is what we're called to accomplish, to go into the world and reach unbelievers with the gospel message. I think that needs to be our commitment, whatever we do, like whatever occupation, whatever, wherever we go, whatever we do, whether we're on vacation, whether we're, at work, whether we're abroad, whether we're here in the States, I think we need to remember always that, we're called to be the light of the world as we shine the light of Jesus Christ on the lives of the people around us. So having said that, can a Christian feel the calling of the Lord to go enlist and be a part of our American military? If that's what the Lord is calling you to do, by all means, you should. I certainly believe in a biblical case for just war. Mm-hmm. We look at World War II, and no doubt in my mind that was a just war that needed to be fought. And by the grace of God, the Lord allowed us to defeat the enemy. To say that there's never a reason for war, or to sing the song "War, what is it good for? Absolutely nothing." It's ridiculous. When you look at what Hitler was accomplishing by way of murdering, all kinds of people, including the Jews, it was just to go in and crush the Third Reich. I do believe that there is a case for just war. I do believe that, Christians would do a service to the world and to our country to be a part of the military, especially as we see, the woke agenda that's in our military right now. If you want a mission field to reach people for Jesus Christ, the military seems to be a pretty good place to go and spread the gospel message of Jesus Christ. And if in the process of enlisting you find yourself, being shipped off and being, called to take up arms against an enemy, at that point in time, you'll have to pray and ask the Lord to guide you in that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, again, I'll add a little bit of context, right? Because from my experience, typically when I hear somebody who's trying to promote pacifism as the way,
yeah,
it usually comes from a standpoint of, well, Jesus taught the golden rule, and they really concentrate on those types of verses that they elevate those above others that we clearly see that, like you said in Revelation, God, when Jesus comes back, it's coming for a final battle, right? There is battle, and there's going to be blood spilled, but these things have their context and their purpose. Now, for humans here, at least, we live in the reality that we've been placed in, and the reality is that there are wars. Now, for a Christian, yeah, I do agree that it's up to every Christian to make up their own mind and to be sure in their own mind that this is something that God is calling them to, and to not take that lightly. You don't want to be the guy who, has just a itchy trigger finger.
Right.
And, okay, well, the Army's a good place to kind of exercise that. And they let me shoot guns, and I'll go ahead and do it. I mean, obviously, you're doing it for selfish reasons and stupid reasons. So just war, I understand, has at least like 7 criteria that you got to really dig deep and ask those questions and answer them appropriately to make sure, is this a just war? Because war is hell, right? War is not, it's brutal. Lives will be killed. Yeah. Lives will be taken. And that's something that you have to take in consideration.
Yeah, and at the same time, we have a whole history of Israel where God is calling, the Israeli army, to go and wipe out idolaters and sinful nations that are engaging in cannibalism and abortion and all these sorts of things, right? Child sacrifice, I should say, and so we certainly see a case, in the Old Testament for the for the people of God forming a military and then being used by God to punish evildoers. There's certainly nothing wrong with that. And yet at the same time, I would also say to the person who feels called to pacifism to say, well, if that's what God is putting on your heart, if that's what you believe the Lord is leading you to do, then you can't sin against conscience. That's one of the unalienable rights that we have, is conscience. The right to conscience. which is, a right to, be a conscientious objector to going to war. So I think that the Christian who says it's not right for me to do this, well, then it's not right for you to do that. But don't turn around and say that because God has called you to pacifism, that he must be then calling all Christians to pacifism, because that's not the case either.
Yeah, good point. Very good. Got a couple more questions here. Speaking of machines, did we speak of machines? What are y'all's thoughts on the advancement of transhumanism and people working towards developing a digital consciousness?
I think that's another show.
Yeah.
I have no idea what it has to do with unalienable rights, but
Nice.
I guess will transhumans have the same unalienable rights?
right.
Like maybe that's
I think so.
part of the question
I
there?
can see that. Yep. So transhumanism essentially is this movement, my understanding, right? This movement that is I see it a lot with futurists and people just kind of, how can we make the human race stronger and live longer and essentially find
Borg.
that fountain of life?
Borg.
How can we live forever, essentially?
You will be
We
assimilated.
want to overcome the natural limitations that we
Right.
have, right? So
Yes.
can we, this is where AI comes in, artificial intelligence. Can we use that to at our disposal to really find things about ourselves that will help us to live longer, become smarter and more efficient and all that? But from what I understand also is that they probably do cross some ethical boundaries there, right? In some experiments that they do.
Yes. I'm sorry I'm laughing, but I'm thinking back to a funny video that we made. We did a whole show on AI back in the early O's.
Okay.
And so the funny video that supported the AI show that we were dealing with back then was this black scientist who creates a white robot to become a dancing robot and then realizes that this white robot ain't got no soul.
Nice.
Oh, it was gold.
So many levels. Oh. That is good.
Anyway, so, I'd be interested to see, how all this develops. I don't know that I could necessarily weigh in on the question. If the question is intended to be, will someone who is, falls under this category of transhuman, will they have the same unalienable rights that, that humans have? It's a hard one, man. That's a difficult thing to address because, were they born human, and altered, and how were they altered? And there's so many questions there that I just don't know that I could offer up a meaningful answer.
But at the very least, right, is we as Christians should be aware of, the ethical boundaries that, just because you can do science doesn't mean you should do all science.
Right.
Obviously,
Yes.
like you hear about, especially the stuff that was going on in World War II and all these experiments that were being done on humans, and just to see what happens, right? Obviously, unethical, highly immoral.
Yeah. Like if we were to find out that, some evil doctor was taking American taxpayer money and using it to engage in gain-of-function research to create a virus that was so powerful that millions of people died, like that's the kind of doctor we would want to lock up forever, right? Just hypothetically speaking.
Hypothetically, yep. But yes, as what I'm getting at, right, is, again, for Christians who are interested in that kind of stuff is, not only, it's not just enough to be interested and hey, did you hear about this? But perhaps, God is calling some of us to go and speak out and really bring order to that area.
Yeah.
And say, hey, we really shouldn't be doing these things.
Yeah.
In fact, is this even a goal that is possible? And is that something that we even want?
Yeah.
And so asking those fundamental questions are probably more important than really, hey, what can we do with science?
Right. Yeah, how far can we push this envelope?
Yeah.
It's like, when we, considering the question, and I think the closest biblical situation that I could appeal to would be, in Genesis when we see the sons of God coming and, manipulating the genetics of humans with the daughters of women or daughters of men. I should say, that we see some level of genetic manipulation resulting in what was called the Nephilim. And, there's so much in that I don't even know how to unpack or understand. But what it seems to me is that God was determined to destroy the human race because so much of the human race was no longer human, so to speak, right? There was some level of genetic manipulation that resulted in some other creation altogether. And so God determined to wipe out the entire human race except for the one family that was still pure in its DNA. They were still literally human. And so then the question is, well, when God destroyed the earth with the Nephilim, is it because the Nephilim had no soul or didn't have the unalienable rights that were enjoyed by, say, Noah and his family? So there might be a basis for an answer to this question that might take me a little bit of time to just ponder and research and
Go do some experiments.
Just
See what comes up.
What if I can just get enough taxpayer money, then I can do anything.
Nice. I did want to mention also, just kind of jumping on that AI track. I remember at least probably a decade ago, and the question was like, do we think that our brains will one day be possibly uploaded, to the internet or something like that? And there's been movies about this, that kind of stuff, right?
Not.
Well, what I'm saying is that to me, it's just obviously impossible that could ever happen. But that was the fear of AI back then, as I understood it. But now what I see is what AI has turned into. And I see, it's not really uploading, your mind to a server or something. But really it's what we see it become is this out of control controlling mechanism. And so you really don't have to fear AI, artificial intelligence, that it will become something greater than humanity. Because ultimately, if you don't know, AI really is just a fancy computer. And computers, as we know, are just really dumb. Because what they do is they just operate certain instructions that people have put in there.
They just run the program.
And all it is really just one person's thoughts about the way they think things should go, so they put the boundaries there. And that's all it's doing. It's operating within those boundaries. Now, obviously, with AI, it's able to compute and do predictive branching and whatnot, but it's always staying within the boundaries that humans have put around it.
The creator.
Yes, and so, but what we see now is that with AI, for some cases, it is being abused. And talking about our unalienable rights, and we do see this happening with our speech. We see a bunch of people's speech being censored, being taken, basically,
now we're talking.
It never happened. Or you have the wrong kind of speech, in our opinion, based on this AI algorithm that humans, certain kinds of humans with certain dispositions and biases and assumptions about the way the world should work, we disagree with you, therefore the world can't hear about you. That's where the troubling aspect comes in. And
there's programs that are searching content to flag it if specific words are brought up, which then is further reviewed by someone who is slanted towards one end of the political spectrum, and they make a determination of whether your content can be freely heard or not. And we had a video that was pulled down, by the powers of the tube of you, and they accused us of medical misinformation. And so we asked them, can you show us where the medical misinformation in the video is? Because if there's medical misinformation, I want to correct the content. It's not my desire to put out medical misinformation. So I do my research, I look at multiple sources, and I want to put out content that is meaningful and true to the facts that I found. So if there is legitimate medical misinformation, I want to correct it. So show me, where in my video was there medical misinformation? Well, we reviewed it again and we've determined that this is medical misinformation. Okay, but I said a lot. There's a lot of things I said here, and the information shifts from this thing to this thing to this thing. There was about 3 or 4 things that were all tied together, with facts from different sources. So where in here is the medical misinformation? Well, we reviewed it again, and yeah, it's medical misinformation. But where? Show me, I'll correct it. I'll correct the information so that we can re-upload the video. Nope. So you can just call something medical misinformation without actually showing the evidence that it actually is. And because it's your platform, you get to then silence my speech, basically because you just don't like what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Not because you have any evidence of medical misinformation, because I give my sources and I present the information that other scientists have put forth.
Yeah, and this is where I hear the response already of, typically of talking about the way this new form of government, and it was really meant to be hands-off, and this is a private entity operating with their own rules.
Sure.
And so the response would be, this, what'd you expect? They're a private entity,
Yep.
so why are you clamoring? If they want to remove you from their platform, then they have the right to do so. It's not like the government's imposing something on you.
I agree if they're functioning as an editor. If they're a publisher and an editor and they're abiding by those rules, then I totally agree. But if they are a platform that allows for all information, or that's the intention, is this to be a platform for free speech, and you zero in on specific speech that you don't like while allowing other things that are way more nefarious to go unchecked, then there's an agenda in that. But if you're functioning under the protection, I forget exactly what the law is called, but if you're functioning under that protection, that the government cannot hold you responsible for some video or content that appears on your platform, and you're using that as a shield to protect you from these things that you are allowing to be published, well then you can't have it both ways. You can't be a publisher and a platform.
Yeah.
You have to pick a lane here. If you're a publisher and you're an editor and you're restraining content according to what you want on your site, totally respect that. We do that with our website. We have a website. We post our videos. We post Bible studies. We post content. We post commentary. We post all of that, and we determine what ends up on this site and what doesn't. And if the government comes along and says, we think that you're liable for this thing that you said right here, well, then we have to take that punishment, for whatever it is that we've been accused of, if we're actually guilty of it, right? But that's not their functioning. When you look at these social media platforms, they're functioning under the protection of, we're not a publisher, we're a platform. And all the stuff that ends up on our platform, we have no control over it until we do.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so if you're going to take control over it, you're no longer a platform, you're a publisher. You're an editor. So now you have to be liable for everything else that is on your platform. So that's where.
Okay, so following up on that, just one more follow-up. As Christians then, is this really the hill we want to die on? Is this something that we really want to fight back against? Can we just say, okay, YouTube, I guess you don't want me on your platform, I just won't speak up? At least I'll add my 2 cents first, and you finish it off. But here's where I'll say that I think we have to take a longer-term look at this. Yes, in the present, we're disturbed by what is happening, and obviously it's inconvenience that we have to go and petition. It feels like they're not enforcing their rules fairly across their entire platform. But a longer-term look at this, we see that you can definitely see a pattern of certain kinds of content that is being censored. And I think it's no coincidence that it seems to line up with kind of like the spirit of the age. You see where culture is headed.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And you see the kind of culture that they want it to be. And so they're using their platform. And so don't be surprised then that, okay, if they get away with it now, they're just going to push it a little bit further the next time, and so on and so forth. And before you know it, I don't want to go too apocalyptic here, but it's basically 1984, you know. All of a sudden you find yourself being indoctrinated. All of a sudden you find yourself, the culture has basically turned itself into
2 + 2 is chicken.
yes. Well, we're talking about this, but there is, and this is where the Christian church really has to kind of be careful in that we have to take our stand where we can, because there are many people who, you know, either apathetic, they don't care. They're just like, well, I'm not dealing with that, so it's not my big deal. But there are some people who are more than willing to just take their cues from people in power.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah, I think we have battles in front of us, and we have to fight the ones that the Lord is calling us to fight. Kind of goes back to pacifism versus versus activism in the military, right? Well, the same is true for apologetics. You know, like I've got friends that are dedicated to Mormonism. I've got friends that are dedicated to Islam. I've got friends that, you know, really zero their focus in apologetically on a specific group or a specific, you know, thing. And I respect that. Like, I would never go to one of those people and say, well, you really ought to broaden your horizons on the different kind of groups that are out there that you could be reaching. No. If God's calling this person to focus in on this specific group, I think that's right on. I think that they have that unalienable right of conscience to be led by the Lord to focus in on the branch of apologetics that they prefer. And the same thing is true for the fights that we fight. You know, so, you know, not every Christian needs to fight and die on the same hill. But I think that if Christians would, you know, fight the good fight of faith where God calls them to fight, then the whole battlefront is taken care of, if that makes sense.
Yep, very good. To each one be convinced in their own mind.
Nice.
All right, a couple more questions, and then we'll call it a day here. A couple good questions to end on. Number one is, to what extent should our moral beliefs as Christians be implemented as national law? In other words, how do Christianity and politics interact that way? And we've probably been touching on that throughout our conversation, but could we summarize that perhaps? How do Christianity and politics interact? And, you know, to what extent should our moral beliefs as Christians be implemented as national law?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I would certainly appeal to the founding fathers and their intent, because you know, the form of government that they developed was for a moral people, and specifically a Christian morality. And therefore, in order to maintain the blessings that we received for the form of government that we've had, the continuation of that kind of government needs to continue. And because it was founded on Christian ethics and Christian morality, then we would do well to continue on course with that. I'll appeal to President Andrew Jackson said in 1845, "The Bible is the rock upon which our republic rests." President Andrew Jackson said that the Bible is the rock upon which our republic rests. That's incredible. Here's what Abraham Lincoln said at his farewell address in 1861. He said this. He was saying, I guess, goodbye at Springfield, Illinois. He said, "Unless the great God who assisted Washington shall be with me and aid me, I must fail. But if the same omniscient mind and mighty arm that directed and protected him shall guide and support me, I shall not fail. Let us all pray that the God of our fathers may not forsake us now." You know, here's the great emancipator, you know, appealing, you know, to the God of Washington, you know, for help in being the leader that he is. I guess, you know, what I'm addressing here is in the question, you know, what does Christianity have to do with our government, is really what's being asked, if I understand it correctly. You know, should we try to legislate Christian morality here within America through or by means of government legislation, right? And I would say yes, you know, according to the original intent of our founding fathers. And if you're unaware of this was their original intent, then you might do well to go and spend some time studying the writings of America's founding fathers, just to see, that many of them encouraged us to vote for Christians, that at the outset, they were encouraging, Christians to be in government and to implement, legislation which is based in, biblical morality. So yeah, I think that should be our goal.
Yeah, and in fact, I will plug another episode. We did Politics and the Bible as a previous episode. Check that out, because in there, I did talk about how for a good number of issues that you see in the forefront, like abortion, right? Roe v. Wade, is it going to be overturned? Because now we have our dream team of Supreme Court justices, supposedly.
Right.
But what's lost in there is that as Christians, as you mentioned, our Great Commission is the furtherance of the gospel. Because the scriptures also tell us that when people submit to the gospel message and ultimately Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior, they are fundamentally and supernaturally transformed from the inside out.
Right.
It is then when now we can change minds on a lot of these issues. And so what I want to just say is, and for a lot of cases, it shouldn't be our first recourse or our only recourse.
Sure,
to say,
no, yeah.
Government, that's trusting in government.
Right.
The only way we can get rid of abortion is if it's legislatively done. That's the easy, in my eyes, that's the easy way out. But, and I mentioned this in that episode, a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still.
Yeah, most certainly.
You tell him, hey, it's illegal. Okay, well, I'm still going to try to find a loophole. I'm still going to try to do it. I'm not convinced. The real work is the groundwork that has to be laid in convincing people that not only that abortion is wrong, but ultimately, who's your creator?
Yeah.
Because that will change your mind on a whole host of issues.
Sure. So, but now you're answering a different question. You're answering the question, should Christians only try to change culture through legislating biblical morality by means of government?
Sure.
And if that were the question, then I would say, oh, most certainly not. People need to be converted to the Christian faith for their heart to change. So, if the question were, how many battlefronts do we face? Well, I would say, oh yeah, we've got multiple. At work, at home, you've got that battlefront. You've got, the sports arena, entertainment arena. You've got all these different arenas to work on, so that we can go and reach this world and everyone here in America, in our mission field at least, with the gospel of Jesus Christ, and disciple them in Christ. So if I were to be asked, should we only rely on government to change people's hearts through law? The law doesn't change hearts. Yep. The law never will change hearts. The law was never intended to change heart. It was only meant to help you to see when you're guilty, right? So we need to lead people to Jesus Christ. We need to lead them to the cross, where they can receive by faith that free gift of grace. But at the same time, it's important to understand that the law is the tutor to bring us to Christ.
Yeah.
Right, and that's specifically referring to the Old Testament law, but that was what the founding fathers were attempting to implement, was a basis for justice based on, the Old Testament, the law, specifically, the Ten Commandments and even the greatest commandments, right? So when we consider that approach, so we should lead people to Jesus so that they can be saved by faith, while also protecting our society from evildoers, who want to go and murder and who want to go and rob and riot and do all these things. Like, there should be just punishment for these people, because it's in the punishment that, if it's carried out properly, that might lead them to the place where they realize, I need to come to the cross and be saved. So some people are going to come to Christ because we gave them a sweet message to come and meet the Jesus that loves them so much. Some of them need the spanking, through the law and the punishment that comes through justice, so that, when someone comes out and says, I'm going to go abort my baby, we say, oh, no, you're going to be punished for that, because that's against the law. We don't murder, our unborn babies here in America. Yeah. right? And so that's illegal. You should know that it's illegal, but because you think that it should be a right, we're going to help you to understand that differently through law. We're going to set up the boundaries with law, and then if you get punished a few times in the process, it might bring you to the place where you're ready to receive the gospel of Jesus Christ. So
Yep.
I think it's a twofold.
That's very good.
It's two sides of the same coin.
Yep, very well said. Very good. Yeah, so hopefully we answered that question sufficiently. Here's our last question, Bungie. We'll close it out with this. If we place such a value on unalienable rights, like the right to life, how do we account for the fact that we have no rights before God? For example, God could take anyone's life that he wants. I'm guessing I interpret that as, like, is there a contradiction? Like, that we have unalienable rights, but before God we don't?
Give it to me again.
If we place such a value on unalienable rights, like the right to life, how do we account for the fact that we have no rights before God? For example, he could take anyone's life that he wants. So can we speak of unalienable rights, like the right to life, like coming from God, but...
The question is loaded with a premise that isn't correct. So the conclusion is wrong because one aspect of the question is loaded, with the concept that God can take a person's life for any reason. Give it to me again and I'll show you where it is.
If we place such a value on unalienable rights, like right to life, how do we account for the fact that we have no rights before God? For example, God could take anyone's life that he wants.
So that's not completely true there. God is not going to do something unjust.
Mm-hmm.
So he can't just take anyone's life that he wants. And I'm thinking about life not only in this world, but also in eternity, because the reality is that we're looking towards a life eternal or a second death for those who reject Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
So the concept that God can just take someone's life just by some random, choice, it almost sounds capricious, like Allah, who, he might wake up one day and, be good to everyone. He might wake up the next day and be a cruel God, or, there's a capriciousness to the concept of Allah, whereas the true and living God of the Bible is the same yesterday, today, and forever, and he is a just judge and will always do what is right. Mm-hmm. So it's, if we're talking about the taking of a life as in the end of their life in this world, I would just say that we're all going to die. That's something that, Adam and Eve drilled into society, not God. So the end of our life is because we're fallen and sin brings death, and so we're eventually going to die. I wouldn't say that that's God taking a life, but rather our life coming to an end here in this world. If by taking a life, this questioner is asking, how is it that God can just decide to send someone to the second death in the lake of fire for the rest of eternity? Well, they forfeit the unalienable right that God gave them. Mm-hmm. Because God gave us the right to life, which is found in Jesus Christ, and those who are in Christ will enter into eternal life. Liberty, which is found in Jesus Christ, so those who are in Christ will enjoy liberty for the rest of eternity. And the pursuit of happiness, which is in Jesus Christ, because Jesus is the blessed one who provides us with all blessings. Therefore, the person who forfeits that by rejecting Jesus Christ has chosen for themselves to be cast into the lake of fire, and thereby forfeiting their unalienable rights that were given to them. They disregarded them and shoved them back at God and said, don't want it. I'm going to reject Jesus and suffer the consequences. So that's not God just randomly and capriciously choosing to take someone's life.
Yeah.
So I reject the premise of the question.
Yeah, it might just be delving more into the nature of God and the fact that, moral values come from his nature. It's not necessarily that he creates them in the ether and they exist independently from him. No, he is the source
Right.
from which they spring from. But also, does that remind you of what is it? Romans 9, basically the potter and the clay,
Oh, yeah, Romans 9.
right? Like, who, does the pot tell the potter, or the clay tell the potter, like what are you doing? You know, you're not in the position as the creator. He can make any decision that he wants, but understanding the nature of God, his decisions will not be gratuitous or it won't be pointless.
Yeah.
They will be righteous. And so he can make those decisions to remove your life if he so chooses. It's going to be for whatever reason that he deems so.
Yeah.
But you can't, it's like when Job, you can't stand there and shake your fist or ask questions. He's going to just come back at you and like, who are you? You're the clay, I'm the potter.
Yeah.
I have that authority over you.
Yeah, and you know, I would just fall back on, you know, that like God can't lie because he is truth. And God can't deceive because, you know, he is truth. And God can't, you know, hate unjustly because he is love, you know. And, you know, so, you know, when we consider God's character, we recognize that our unalienable rights flow from his character, his being. And he would never randomly just take away unalienable rights without justification. Mm-hmm. So if he does make a decision to take a life, then it's justified, you know, in the fact that, you know, the person who was, I guess, you know, cast into the lake of fire, you know, that person forfeit the unalienable right that they were given.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't look at God as this capricious God who can just, you know, at a whim, just decide one day that he's just going to take this life, and there's no justification for it.
Right.
And he can just remove unalienable rights from us without any, you know, justification for that kind of a decision. No, everything that God chooses to do is just. He is the source of justice. He is the standard of true justice. And every decision that he makes is just by nature of who he is.
Yep. Very good. Very good line to end on. So that will do it for this episode of Studio 118. Thank you for joining us. Really good conversation on unalienable rights. Again, feel free to, as I've been told, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. But feel free to share this link with your people on social media. And again, we will see you next month. We'll give you an update as to what our topic will be, but tune in. It's typically the first Thursday of the month, so we will see you then.
That's August, right?
That will be August.
So probably going to be talking about hell.
Because it's so hot?
It's going to be the hottest hell show.
There you go. All right, well, we'll catch you then. Until then, I'm Ruben, this is Bungie, and we will see you the next time. Thank you.